Hello to all my queers and dears, and welcome uh, to a live stream where I'm going to be dealing with a video that I don't like. Welcome to to a live stream where. But I figure since it'll be useful for me to have an actual live reaction that I can use for some footage and stuff like that for an upcoming video. I don't know. Just seemed like this was potentially useful to do. And yeah. Oh boy. But I don't know. And then I think I'll probably put this live stream on Patreon after it's done. Is that an echo effect? I don't know. Can anyone else hear an echo effect? Want to make sure that everything's working all right before I get started. Heard an echo effect early in the video, but it's gone now. Great. Okay. Let me make this a little smaller. There we go. Then the no capture, just move it up just a little. All right, let's get started. Obviously I won't be I won't have footage to disprove anything. That'd be a whole other thing, and that's obviously going to be limited mainly for the final video. But I think I have enough knowledge to be able to pause and talk about why something is incorrect. And then the final video I can have more specific examples, I guess. So let's get started. Just making sure everyone can hear that first, though. Can everyone hear the video? hbomberguy's video, I mean. There's a delay, by the way, so that's why I'm waiting in silence. I'm waiting in silence for the video to catch up. You can hear it? All right, then let's get started. I don't really want to do this. I do just want to remind everyone in my chat here that this is not going to highlight any allegations against hbomberguy. This is not about that. Here we are just focusing on the video. Okay? And we are approaching it in primarily good faith, which I know some people won't like, but that's what we're doing, okay? It's the only way to really properly judge this video. In a way that doesn't alienate a ton of people. I have to take this on some amount of good faith. As if hbomberguy actually believes what he's saying. Otherwise, I'm going to alienate a bunch of people. That said, there will, I'm sure, be points when I highlight dishonesty and the like. So, like, I'm not gonna hold back on criticism if something really seems like a lie. But in terms of, or if it's like really just dishonest in terms of like trying to smear somebody or paint a narrative, but I am also like specifically in terms of watching the show, right? I'm going to assume he watched the show and these were his opinions. I personally do feel like this is a very bad faith video, but the best way to criticize something is to assume in good faith. That is always the case. It's in terms of a piece of media, anyway, I should say. Actually, no, that's not true. That's not true, actually. There's definitely... I don't know. It's complicated. That's a whole conversation for another time, honestly. But what I mean in terms of assuming good faith is that people genuinely believe what they're saying, even if it's all dishonest. Like, but at the same time that's not always true. So, never mind. But in this specifically, because of the other work that hbomberguy has done, which is very well researched, very intelligent, has done a lot of good, I'm going to be assuming that this is in some good faith, that he went in, even if he watched it in bad faith, that these are his genuine opinions, not things he made up just to slander people. So yeah. With all that out of the way, let's get started.
When it was first announced, RWBY seemed like it was going to be great. It was produced by a darling of independent web content, and created by a legendary animation genius and some of his most trusted colleagues, and written by two... But even with all this stuff in place...
Yeah, okay, that's already starting out really badly. For those who don't know, Shane, Shane is rather infamous in the RWBY fandom. He wrote a letter that has had a very bad impact and was very entitled, and sort of painted him as the one who knew Monty truly and knew what Monty wanted. Monty is, of course, the creator of RWBY, for those who don't know, Monty Ohm. And sort of, yeah, it's pretty infamous. And has had a very long and negative impact on discussion around RWBY. It is, I do not know, and most people don't know, if Shane still holds these opinions to this day. But it's had such a lasting impact that there's definitely some serious resentment towards Shane that deserves to be highlighted. And he's already starting out saying, Shane was one of his most trusted colleagues, and then the writers were too... And he leaves that hanging in a way that definitely is like, oh, Miles and Carrie are not talented, they're not... And they're certainly not Monty's most trusted colleagues. That's what he's really saying. That they're not his most trusted colleagues and his most trusted friends. And that's factually untrue. Monty specifically went to Miles and Carrie, Miles Luna and Carrie Shawcross, to write RWBY. They were his first and only choice. Monty went to them specifically. They were there from the very, very start. They were arguably his most trusted colleagues. They are the co-creators of RWBY. It is their show just as much as it is Monty's, and that has always been the case. So we're already starting out pretty badly with him saying his most trusted colleagues by showing Shane, and then showing Miles and Carrie separate from being his most trusted colleagues, even though he went to them first to help write RWBY. We're already starting out pretty badly.
RWBY's pretty bad. The basic concept, a 3D anime about monster hunters, is great, and when it tries to flesh this out, there's some really interesting ideas at times, and in brief moments, it's got scenes or segments that suddenly really work. But overall, it's confusing and frustrating, it isn't fun to watch, and no matter how much attention you give it, your attention is only rewarded with more writing or animation problems. It's not like the worst show ever made, but RWBY's failures matter because it really could have been something, and that makes the parts that were good even sadder, because you can always see what it could have been, and maybe almost was. I want to just call this garbage and move on with my life, but it's just not that simple, which is a shame for me. It means I can't use the most popular video title I use when I criticize media. Is this it? Is this gonna be on my fucking gravestone? 8 long years into production, with a massive crew by web video standards, and its 8th season on the way. Sorry, volume. They call them volume? The show has garnered a pretty large following and a super devout fanbase, and it's easy to see why. The show frequently threatens to suddenly become good. People saw what it promised.
Okay, so let me finish this.
The pieces are all still there, and sometimes, just often enough for people to keep watching, it looks like they're going to fall into place. But they never have.
Okay, so let me talk about this real quick. A lot of those were just his opinions. And that's fine. He doesn't have to like RWBY. And then he specifically points out, and let's be clear, it's been 1 minute and 42 seconds of this video. And then he says that the reason RWBY has such a big fan base is basically because it, quote, right, frequently promises to get good. Which, if we're really putting this in context, he's basically saying that the writers keep leading the audience on, and that we're all suckers for liking it, basically. That we are being tricked into loving RWBY because it could always get good. He may not be intending to, but he's basically calling all the actual RWBY fans suckers. Just so we're clear. Bardock, you do not have to be here if you do not want to be. This is 100% your choice. But yeah. God. Oh boy. And again, he may not be intending to, but that is the message he is sending here.
And it's starting to become clear that they probably never will. And that makes the show infinitely more disappointing than something you could easily say is worse. And the reasons why the show has failed to become what it could have been are multitudinous and interlinked. There's a million distractingly small problems that ultimately aren't that big a deal and weaken real criticism by being given too much attention. And every major problem ties into and is responsible for every other major problem in a way that makes it almost impossible to unpick. RWBY may be the first show ever to be holistically bad, but do not despair, fellow believers in objective analysis of cartoons. I'm here to defend you and eviscerate RWBY with a sword made of logic and reason. It's a metaphorical sword, really. Oh, also it can turn into a gun, because that would be cool. This is how media criticism works, right? So, this time on the increasingly infrequent Cries for Help my family refuses to believe is my job, I'll be exploring the problems that started in the early years of the show's development, how they set the tone for a show that never quite ended up where it could have been, why it matters that such a promising thing turned out this way, and exactly how and why so many decent ideas can often get misunderstood when writers simply borrow them from other shows they like. I'm focused.
Okay, so okay. Yeah. So, the odd thing here, right, is that a little bit of that introduction is basically him saying, like, I'm not good at media criticism. That's kind of what he's doing there. Is like... And then he goes ahead and does that. Right? Like, he says, oh, I'm going to, you know, talk about this using, like, logic and reason, and, like, this is how media criticism works, right? And he's, like, making fun of literally what he's about to do. And he does it, he goes on and does it purely sincerely, like, with no... I don't know, it's just, it's annoying. How can you make fun of what you're about to do and then go ahead and do it purely, like, just sincerely? Like, it doesn't... And then, you know, we'll get into this a lot later, but the idea that basically RWBY has no original ideas. That he goes into this a lot later, and he really argues that RWBY just takes ideas from things that Miles and Carrie like without understanding why they work in the original thing. Accusing RWBY of having no original ideas, like, just starting out there, for crying out loud, is just like... okay. By the way, in terms of pointing out animation errors, again, this is something that's, like, really frustrating, of, like, here, he's making fun of the idea that, like, animation error, like, small animation errors are something to truly complain about. And then later, he does actually go on and complain about the animation, especially in the early volumes. So it's like, there's little bits and pieces that allow him a little bit of plausible deniability in a way that's really frustrating. Yeah, agreed. Nothing's 100% original nowadays, so that's a moot... it's a moot point, by the way. M-O-O-T. What does matter is what the writers do with said idea. Something the writers in RWBY do very well. I agree. The thing is that hbomberguy believes they don't do anything with it, really. But the problem is that he judges it on whether it's succeeding at the thing it's paying homage to, rather than whether it does something for RWBY. He is judging it on terms that are a bit unfair. Anyways, at least that's my feeling on it, but again, we'll get there, and we'll talk about those specific ways that he discusses that specific criticism.
Focusing primarily on the first 3 seasons of the show in this video, because RWBY can be pretty neatly divided into 2 separate eras, with 2 different sets of problems that don't fully overlap, and for the purposes of criticism, I intend to treat them as distinct entities in most cases. If you're a fan of the show, you're probably dreading the worst here, although if you're a fan of the second half of the show, you probably already agree with most of what I'm going to say, but in any case...
Okay. What does that... First, he says, I'm going to be focusing specifically on the first 3 volumes, because that and then the second part, right, the post-volume 3 stuff, have different sets of problems, right? Different sets of problems. And then he says, but if you're a fan, if you're a fan of the post volume 3 stuff, you probably agree with everything I'm going to say. How does that make any sense? You just said you're only going to be that the post volume 3 stuff has different sets of problems. So acting like this is a way to criticize the entire show, like, and also, to be clear, the entire video does absolutely have him, like, he mostly focuses on stuff that is volume 1 through 3. In fact, about half the video, I found this out when I watched it last time, about half the video focuses on volume 1. Which is really absurd. Just so we're clear, right? Volume 1 had, like, so little budget and was all growing pains. They were still figuring things out. They've been pretty open about that, and everyone kind of agrees on it. And, just so we're clear, Volume 1, in its entirety, is about an hour and a half. So he spends about half the video criticizing RWBY, focusing on the very first volume, when they were still figuring everything out, had almost no budget. Rooster Teeth didn't have an animation department yet. They didn't have an animation department until Volume 3, just so we're clear, right? And he does have criticisms in this video of post-Volume 3 stuff. So, I don't know. This just feels kind of bad faith. A little bit. But just because he doesn't hold up to this. Like, he says that I'm going to be focusing... He says he's going to be focusing on Volume 1 through 3 primarily, which I guess he does, but then, I don't know. It's annoying.
If you like RWBY and you still watch this video, I love you, and thank you for joining me on this journey. My goal isn't to make anyone think less of a show, just to think more about it. It's important to be critical of media you enjoy, and there is a lot to enjoy about RWBY, so I hope to give credit where it's due. And in the places that aren't as good, well, that's way more interesting. It's often said that failure is one of the best learning experiences, and in that respect, RWBY has a lot of good things to teach.
I'm not even going to go into that one. He's just, like, again, he's already sort of treating it like he's being objective. And he's not. And that's an issue with the whole video.
Oh, do we not have a cool animated intro for this video? It's about an anime, it would have been kind of cool. Are we just going with the standard? It's fine. I mean, it's a bit underwhelming, but... Hey, do you all remember Rooster Teeth? No, I don't mean AT&T's, Warner Media's, Otter Media's Rooster Teeth, the company with hundreds of employees that makes podcasts and shows and movies and games.
Rooster Teeth is starting video game development.
I mean, Rooster Teeth, the 5 or so people who made Red vs. Blue in their bedroom.
Hey, yeah? You ever wonder why we're here? It's one of life's great mysteries, isn't it?
Popular on the web in the early years was machinima. People would pose and act characters in games, effectively using video games as a medium for making movies.
Not in my diner, you know, lumberjacks. Didn't you see the design? It just said no lumberjacks.
Oh yeah, I didn't see that sign.
Red vs. Blue wasn't the first attempt to make something like this, but it was far and away the most popular one.
All right, here's the plan.
And it was shockingly successful. People who had no idea what machinima was knew about Red vs. Blue. How many people could make a show half as good as this using what amounts to a microphone and a copy of Halo? I certainly couldn't, and I know because I tried, and I'm so glad no one saw that. I was saved by not knowing how to upload videos when I was 12. YouTube would simply not accept my Windows Movie Maker file. As a business, 2000's Rooster Teeth were incredibly smart, a tiny team producing a fairly simple show made in a video game engine, but managing to promote it and build it into a recognizable brand of its own. The show had merch, not Halo merch, but Red vs. Blue merch. Rooster Teeth had done what was basically impossible, and successfully built a business making machinima. Not even Machinima did that. So yeah, well done to Bernie Burns and the rest of the team. Anyway, then it kept going for like a decade while I wasn't looking. No, really, they're still making Red vs. Blue over at Rooster Teeth. Did you know that? Can you conceive of the idea that a show you had fun with in your bedroom when you were in high school is 17 seasons deep? I found that out while I was working on this video, and a friend told me that they're on season 17. It's still hitting me. Why haven't they stopped? Well, it's not because the creators of Red vs. Blue had 17 years of ideas in them. Rooster Teeth isn't a small company whose people can do what they want creatively anymore. They've been bought. They're part of a large conglomerate now, and their work isn't just a show they like making for fun because they had a nice idea. It's an intellectual property with a capital I and P, and they're gonna keep making it for as long as it theoretically makes money, no matter how little anyone wants to make it.
As Bernie has always said, as long as people like it, we will keep making it. Yep, so shut the fuck up.
And even once you hate it, even once you're totally fed up with it, you're like, just stop, we'll still be there.
Milk the shit out of it. Every penny it's worth.
Meanwhile, in another corner of the internet, another form of early web hashtag content was being produced. A guy named Monty was putting 3D animations of some incredibly cool fights on the internet, on places like early YouTube and DeviantArt and game trailers. God, remember game trailers? Oh, I feel so old now. His most long-running work was the Dead Fantasy series. Short fights featuring the female characters from Dead or Alive and Final Fantasy. These animations are still really cool. They're basically just characters you know from stuff fighting, but that's all they have to be. The fights feel desperate, violent, impactful, cool, fast, and incredibly technical. There's nothing quite as good as these at the things these are doing. But perhaps the most well-known Monty animation was released in 2007. It was called Haloid. Haloid is utterly fantastic. Halo Man beats up hundreds of Halo aliens, but then Metroid Man turns up and they fight. But then it turns out Metroid Man is a girl, and then they fight each other again, and also more aliens in a big sequence so epic, only music taken directly from the Matrix Reloaded's Burly Brawl scene could possibly do it justice. And they even pay homage to some scenes from that fight while they're at it. They blow all the aliens up and escape, reenacting another cool scene from the Matrix Reloaded in the process. But then it turns out that Halo Man was also a girl. Oh my god! And then they watched the sunset. Ah, that's nice. Maybe I'm being...
So, just so we're clear, right? You know, I don't have an issue with the, you know, with, like, it's not a great joke, but, yeah, whatever. In the Metroid Man, whatever, like, yeah, whatever. And yes, I agree that watching it a few weeks before Rooster Teeth shuts down for good is hard. But what I want to highlight here is that he just complimented Haloid for taking stuff like very specifically from the Matrix, right? Very specifically paying homage to them. And he doesn't talk at all about whether they accomplish the same thing. Right? He says, in fact, that it's really cool that it replicates moments from the Matrix. Or from the Matrix Reloaded or whatever. He compliments it. Keep that in mind for later.
being overly sentimental about some animated fights, but the late great Monty Ohm was basically a genius at what he did. The guy passed away really tragically and suddenly in 2015, but the body of work he left behind is genuinely fantastic and inspirational. It's fascinating to me that stuff Monty made for fun, for free in a couple of weeks, is infinitely more dynamic and fun and engaging than stuff real big budget animation productions have put together. I can barely think of a handful of things that even remotely compare. For a time, Rooster Teeth and Monty Ohm were just their own things off in their own corners of the internet. But then, 2010, PAX. Rooster Teeth premiere a new episode of Red vs. Blue. It's standard fare for the show, really. Familiar characters, familiar engine limitations, cute meta jokes about how nerfed the pistol was in the new Halo game.
You know, these things aren't quite as effective as they used to be.
But then,
Do you want to hear,
I wasn't there when this happened, but I remember going as wild as this crowd did when I saw this episode online. The limitations of the Halo games had been broken. Who could be behind it? Who am I kidding? You know who's behind it. You've guessed this bit.
We saw a short film called Haloid by a gentleman by the name of Monty Ohm. And we were extremely impressed by what we saw. This is, if you haven't seen it before, it's a piece where Master Chief fights Metroid.
Wow, Bernie. Video game knowledge check fail. It's Sergeant Metroid. Have some respect for the troops. Monty had been hired in secret by Rooster Teeth to work on animation for the new season of Red vs. Blue. For almost 10 years now, I've been so in love with how they introduce him. He's literally in the audience and they say, hey, Monty's here now, and he just gets up and joins in as the fourth panelist. It's excellent.
It is actually
showmanship,
quite
and also
good.
just really kind of beautiful. So now in Red vs. Blue, there were suddenly tons of interesting and creative animated sequences. And when some kind of fight was going to happen, instead of being in-engine characters standing and shooting at each other and being kind of boring, it'd be a Monty Ohm fight. These sequences really added a lot to the series. Alright, now you're just showing off.
Well, that's the big thing. We like doing team-up stuff, right? And we found Monty on the internet. Here's something he's doing that's really cool that we can't do. So we're just going to come together and make something cool.
As they grew, they expanded their production of other shows and podcasts and became a media entity which would eventually be worthy of the ultimate prize, being bought and turned into a subsidiary of a larger media conglomerate. However, their biggest show and Monty's animations were still technically just fan works of someone else's intellectual property. Monty and the others clearly wanted to paint on a bigger canvas and have a fresh start. Monty wanted to create something as...
Just so we're clear, from what I'm aware of, there were actually a lot of very complex feelings around being acquired at Rooster Teeth. People were very worried, but their ambitions were a bit too high. Or maybe they're not a bit too high, but the point is that they were struggling monetarily. And so they got bought by Otter Media. They accepted that acquisition or something along those lines. And then Otter Media was bought by Warner Bros. And then Warner Bros. Was bought by AT&T. And then, of course, AT&T spun off Warner Bros. And then Discovery merged with Warner Bros. You know, the point is that a lot of it was actually outside of their control. They agreed to one acquisition that was significantly smaller, and they were worried about it. Now, the good news is that it turned out that they were able to mostly keep their creative independence, but that also meant that they didn't really have any backing from Warner or you know, whatever. So, you know, they had financial independence, which gave them creative independence, but it also made things a lot harder. Anyways, you know, mostly he's correct. And, you know, mostly he's correct. Which is sort of the frustrating thing about this video, is that he does sort of combine actual facts and reality with his own opinions in a way that, like, there's not clear distinctions between them. So it all gets very muddled in a way that feels bad faith.
As expressive and unique and stylish as the anime and video games that had inspired him.
Like, Monty and I are working on right now a whole series that's just not machinima at all, it's just animation stuff. Right. And we're throwing around ideas for that.
This show would turn out to be called RWBY, and the first of 4 trailers for the series was released with the conclusion of Red vs. Blue Season 10.
But RWBY, which we finally showed a trailer for at the conclusion of Red vs. Blue Season 10 last night.
Fuck yeah.
We're fucking excited. It's awesome.
Now, obviously, I'm kind of biased against this show. I'm making a whole video about why I didn't like it. Keep this in mind when I say that RWBY's Red trailer fucking owns.
Okay, so again, this is like the little bit of plausible deniability, right? He literally says, I am biased against this show. It's a little bit of plausible deniability. And then, you know, but, like, he's already said, like, you know, he's already implied that, you know, people who are actually fans of this show, are people who have been led on by the writers, because, you know, he's already sort of laid the groundwork to buy into this, as not just his opinion. And there's just enough of this throughout the video that people can point to it and say, you know, why are you taking this video so seriously? Like, why does it bother you so much? Which is, of course, why I'm making this, and why I'm doing this live stream, to talk about it. Yeah, there's just enough, but then he really does go into things that he sort of treats as objective. And like I said, he's already primed his audience a little bit to not take this as opinion, to sort of, you know, really highlight that, like, he's sort of saying, you know, again, like, you know, he's a little bit pushed his audience, especially anyone who hasn't seen RWBY, in a direction of also being biased a little bit. Yeah. Like, I want to give him credit for being upfront about some of this, but then the way that this video is, the way it frames stuff, and the fact that there was already, like, some moments that feel like a little bit like priming the audience to react a certain way, it feels more like introducing plausible deniability than being upfront with his audience. And I don't want to assume necessarily that was the case, but that's certainly how it comes across to me.
It's an extravaganza of violence, visual style, speed, timing, and this is one of the most fantastic things ever. Everyone who saw this flipped the fuck out. Holy shit, it's a scythe that turns into a gun. Oh! The Red trailer has 15 million views on YouTube. That's more than any episode of RWBY. That's more than any episode of Red vs. Blue. The first episode has 14 million views, and just for the record, the second episode has 6.8. The only things on Rooster Teeth's channel with more views are the really cool Monty fight from Red vs. Blue Season 8, which I already showed, which they uploaded on its own separately from the show because they knew it was amazing.
You established earlier that RWBY has a huge fan base. A huge one. You very specifically established that. And now you're saying, oh, you know, once the actual writing was introduced, people stopped liking it as much. That's the implication here. I don't know, it just feels annoying.
Joke Angry Birds movie trailer that went viral twice, you know, once when it came out and then again when actual trailers for the actual real Angry Birds movie started coming out, and Minecraft Let's Play, because of course. The trailer is very simple. This red character visits a grave, then gets accosted by werewolves before fighting and killing dozens of them. But it's so much more than that. It's so cool looking, so good feeling to watch, and just so alive with motion that it sells the show right away. You immediately want to see more of it and know what's going on in this world. Welcome back, by the way. I'm saying that because half the people watching this video remembered the Red trailer while I was talking about it and paused to go watch it again. Another thing I want to bring up while we're here is that this is the best piece of music Jeff Williams has ever composed. Jeff had been doing music for Rooster Teeth since early in the Red vs. Blue days, and while he was clearly talented, there wasn't much room in Red vs. Blue most of the time for his music to shine. And this trailer really gives him the chance to do that, and he clearly latched onto it like a limpet. The song in this trailer introduces a really powerful motif. It's this bit here. It has a surprising amount of versatility. It gets used later in this fight in a much more intense variation.
I agree with this.
Sound will basically be RWBY's, both the show and the characters, central theme for the rest of the series. They knew they had something great with this, and they just went with it. The White trailer introduces us to a character called Weiss, who appears to be a singer, and it intercuts her singing with a sequence where she fights a giant knight with a rapier with a revolver in the handle. She has more of a magic-oriented fight style, and the fight's pretty good. I really like how expressive the visuals are in these first two trailers. The world is stark colours and the lighting is harsh. The backgrounds here are blacks and whites. It's hard to tell if the events of the trailer are literal or if this is a liminal space and the knight represents something. I like the red on the inside of her dress and boots too. It really pops out and makes the whole visual design work. They've really committed to making the character one colour but giving them just enough of other stuff that it stands out even more. Weiss's singing is done by Casey Lee Williams, Jeff Williams' daughter, who was 15 at the time. Casey's clearly pretty talented, so it works. Weiss wins and it fades back to her singing for the audience, but the wound she got in the fight fades to a scar. Did she get it in this fight, or from something else? Ooh, mysterious. The Black trailer introduces us to writing and voice acting.
Blake, it's time.
I'm sorry, what? I'll turn that up for you.
Blake, it's time.
Oh god, I shouldn't have turned it up. They anime ninja run over to catch a train snaking through this beautifully designed red forest. Inside the train is a cool fight with evil robots! Yeah! The fight's pretty good. Blake's weapon is a sword, whose holster is another bigger sword, and they're connected by a string or something. Also, it can turn into a gun. It looks neat, but I couldn't tell you exactly what it does. I like it though. The music in this trailer has lyrics too, sung again by Casey Lee Williams. The singing is, well, this time she's being pushed to sing aggressive anime fight music. The fight is cool though. I don't think it's as cool as the Red trailer because it's set in or on a train, so the fight sequences are in a rectangular box, or basically just a straight line. It's hard to have creative...
Look, this is fine, this is all his opinion. I don't necessarily agree, but he has the right to his opinion. Yeah, in terms of it, in terms of that first thing, Red Like Roses, in the Red trailer, Red Like Roses Part 1, yeah, I mean, claiming it to be the best one, again, that's his opinion. It's fine. Yeah, yeah, don't like the bit where he complained about the writing and voice acting at the start of the Black trailer. Yeah, I mean, you know, again, they're just starting. Just, right? Just. This is before the show even comes out. They're still, like, new at all this. So already we are getting, like, a bit of a very specific judgment of the work that is Miles and Carrie. And, like, I agree that the fights were better than the writing and even the voice acting to some extent at this early time. And that's fine. That's not... I don't know. Like, I don't feel like that should be such a huge issue. But that's his opinion. That's fine. He can dislike it. And in terms of, like, Casey doing, you know, hardcore anime fight music, and him not liking that, that's also just an opinion. That's fine. You can see I'm trying to separate the stuff that clearly comes across as opinion and the stuff that he sort of tries to point out as actual issues in the show. Not stuff that just affects him personally, but stuff that he feels are active failures that should be learned from, as he sort of framed it earlier. 'Cause when you say that, right, and you say that there are failures that people should learn from, that is not, you're not speaking from a point of opinion there, right? Or, I mean, you sort of are, but you're also sort of not, right? You're coming at this from a place of, you know, I'm not just, like, there are things that are actively bad that writers should avoid, right? And so if you're misrepresenting that stuff, right? The stuff that you are framing as a failure of writing or a failure of the creators, that stuff I'm going to be much more critical of. This stuff right here was mostly opinion and mostly came across as opinion to me, at least.
Movements and camera work in that setup, it's a bit of a limitation. Halfway through, we get the first proper story beat of our whole show.
Perfect. I'll set the charges.
What about the crew members?
What about them?
Oh, I think he might be a bad guy. This is the beginning of a writing problem which starts here and continues to plague the show until, actually it hasn't stopped yet. When you have a character straight up say, I don't care about killing civilians to someone's face, what you're doing is having a character openly admit they've been written to be the bad guy. And that's incredibly weird because they've written monsters into the setting that are just generically evil and want to destroy humanity because that's in their nature. So it's very weird that the actual characters that you wrote behave like that too. Anyway, they get attacked by a robot, and the guy cuts it apart in a genuinely really cool shot. But then it gets to the front of the car, and Blake says goodbye and cuts the car free, leaving him behind, obviously having a problem with his being okay with killing innocent people. And I guess this is the first time she's noticed this about him. And as she disappears into the distance, and the colors really beautifully fade away so she's alone in a void, and we're given a meaningful impression of her emotional state, the audience is struck with one lingering thought. He can make that jump.
Okay, let's talk about that. So, first of all, right? This is a very short thing, right? The trailers are very short. They're very short. So getting information across in a very short amount of time makes sense. It is... You don't have time in what these trailers were designed to be to introduce some kind of nuanced backstory and then, like, play out all that stuff. And, you know, and he's criticizing this, but he also knows at this point, because he's watched the rest of the show, that Blake is an abuse victim. So her sticking with Adam is, like, clearly, again, with the context of the rest of the show that he has watched at this point, that Blake stuck with him for much longer than was healthy, because she was an abuse victim, because he manipulated her, because he gaslit her, because he turned her into someone that relied on him. So, like, and then there's also just, like, the fact of, like, the idea that it's somehow bad writing to have monsters that want to destroy humanity and then also have bad people who don't care about innocence. Why is that an issue? Why is that an issue? Like, how is that a writing issue to just have, like, monsters and also villains? I don't understand criticism of that as a writing issue. And yeah, Bardock is correct in the comments in terms of there being some pretty good storytelling. At the very least, very efficient storytelling. So yeah, oh boy. Hold on, just adding another tag to the video. It's probably useful. By the way, if people can, like, share this stream and stuff like that, it's, you know, it's useful. I posted it on a bunch of different places. So, like, retweeting it or, you know, resharing it on Instagram or whatever. I don't know. It's useful, and because this is a sucky experience. And I would appreciate it being at least something that people can appreciate the work the emotional and actual work I'm putting in.
In the yellow trailer, we're introduced to Yang, a character based on Goldilocks. So we have Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Goldilocks, and this one isn't really clear yet, but trust me, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Yang goes to a bar whose soundtrack is a remix of the theme from the Red trailer. It's neat. She beats up the manager over whether he's seen someone in a picture, and she's written like two adult men who've never written anything professionally before except for Red vs. Blue trying to write a teenage girl. Weirdly specific impression there.
Oh, Junior, I was just playing with you. Don't be so sensitive. Come on, let's kiss and make up, okay?
But after 2 minutes, she punches the guy and a fight starts, and the trailer gets really good. Her weapons are gloves that unfold into fist guns. Yang's design and basic fighting style seem very evocative of Tifa from Final Fantasy VII, a character Monty previously liked to use a lot in Dead Fantasy. It kind of makes sense that some of the characters are designed around characters he previously liked animating. But now they're his own characters that he has total control over. Yang has 3 back-to-back cool fights against a gang of guys who all dress like Jim Sterling, 2 ladies who I guess are bodyguards or something, and then against the guy she punched earlier. She punches him with so much power that the screen gets a Photoshop filter over it, and when she lands outside the bar, RWBY is there.
Yang? Is that you?
Oh no, is that how she talked? The writing and voice acting could do with some refining, and some of Jeff's musical decisions could be dialed back just a little bit. But basically, these trailers are some of the coolest possible trailers for a cartoon ever. Like, if you showed me every trailer for every cartoon and asked me which one I'd want to see at the end of that, of course I'd pick Lunatics Unleashed. I mean, seriously, this is fucking insane. Why would anyone make this? I have to know. But at a very close second, I'd pick this one. Literally millions of people have gone back to watch the Red trailer again, and looking at view figures, they've done that instead of watching more of the actual show.
Yeah, so, like, that's what I was saying earlier about him, about him, like, sort of framing it as, oh, to be clear, he is not saying we don't know who Belle is. He's setting that up as a discussion point for later. I mean, I guess he's sort of saying we don't know who she is at this point, but, like, I don't know. Like, I would say that Blake isn't any less clear than Weiss is as Snow White. So, you know. Okay. Okay. Hold on just a second. I would like to actually just quickly share this in some Discord servers I'm in. Share this stream in some Discord servers I'm in. Again, like, I want this to be valuable. I want this to be watched and appreciated. Cause it's not fun. Really. So I'm gonna share it in some Discord servers I'm in. Why do I have that many tabs open? Because I'm bad at organization, and stuff. Look, I know that. I know that that's not good. I know, like, it's an issue, alright? But, like, I don't know. It's how I have to, I don't know. It's what happens. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. But that is ultimately not the point of this particular stream. So I'm just going to finish posting this in some places, and then get back to the video. And I'll probably cut this specific part out of the VOD. Which again, I'm going to specifically focus. I'm gonna put the full stream of this behind Patreon, so that I have, you know, something there, I guess. Because I haven't really put anything there before, kind of. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, I want this to, I want people to, first of all, I want people to be able to see this. I think it's valuable for people to be able to see the you know, to see this work. But also, it's a frustrating enough experience that I would like people to be able to appreciate it. So, alright. There we go. Now, let's get back to work. Or something. Work. Yeah. Anyways.
They're not just amazing teasers for a show, they're just good! It's so hard not to be on board for the show these trailers are pointing to. They imply a show that's going to be utterly, fantastically tremendous. But then it came out and it was bad. Oh, you're still here. Right, so RWBY isn't as simple as a bad show, is it? It's a bad show which could have been something truly amazing. And that makes its problems infinitely more interesting and important to explore. And it's especially worth doing because the show's creators do try to be receptive to criticism. Well, they try, but this manifests in a strange way I'd like to discuss real quick. The writers have talked on podcasts, commentary tracks, panels, and so on about the ways people have been shitty about the show, and how important it is to not be an asshole when you're criticizing something.
People will make a comment, maybe it's like a criticism or something, and you go, oh, okay, yeah, that's a fair critique, but you don't want to listen to them because of the way they said it.
Which is something I think most people agree with.
It's really tough when you get a criticism that you actually agree with, but you think was expressed in an incredibly insensitive and rude way. Because you never want to reward harassment like that. That's not the way people get things. It's just not.
I really get what he's saying here, and yeah, plenty of criticism of the show is worthless dog shit. For some reason, this show seems to attract people who need excuses to yell at cartoon women. But I'm having a hard time finding more than one or two decent examples of times they've really explored actual criticisms of the show.
Then you're not paying attention. Then you're not paying attention. It happens so often. They address criticisms so often. Every single volume improves the show. Every single one. They are always improving, always you know, trying to grow as creators and writers. So, you know, I'm just... And, like, you know, the whole thing of, like, yeah, I'm glad that he recognizes that there is a lot of bad faith criticism about RWBY. That is just designed to be mean. He does not appear to have any self-awareness. In fact, he really is seemingly trying to separate himself from those kinds of people. And, like, whoa. So, again, like, trying not to... trying to assume this is in good faith. Like, I do just want to say, like, he is very intentionally saying, oh, there's a bunch of people in bad faith, but I'm doing this in good faith. And again, he's sort of priming his audience to feel a certain way about this video, rather than make up their own mind about it. Again, whether he intends to or not, right? Whether he intends to or not, that is what he's doing. And, like, in terms of addressing criticisms, right, seriously, they do that a lot. The RWBY do that a lot. And if he can't find examples of that, that is an issue with him. Right? I don't know about that, Bardock. I don't know. I think it's just a bad joke. In terms of the this animated bit where he's, yeah, I don't know.
And the fact the show keeps making the same mistakes implies they kinda don't. I've seen the writers sometimes quote retweet someone being shitty about the show and responding to this behaviour, and again, often what they're saying is correct. If you have a point but you're an asshole about it, no one will want to listen to you. I basically agree completely with what Miles is saying here, but he appears to spend a significant amount less time responding to the kinds of criticism he says he wants to see. And there is good faith criticism out there, so stepping over them to point at bad faith criticisms and complain about how they're not helpful means that functionally all you're doing is rewarding shitty people with time and attention you then don't spend engaging with the people who make the decent criticisms of your work. And as a lifelong fan of Rooster Teeth and Monty, I certainly hope it's clear that my criticism comes from a well-meaning place. I'm only here because I really thought the show could have been great, and I still think that maybe it could be. Hey, see? The chapel wasn't just here to be a reference to that scene from Kingsman, it was also a clever metaphor for my intent to make a good faith criticism.
Yeah, okay. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. That's all so loaded. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. Where to even start with that? First of all, right? They address criticisms by addressing criticisms in the show, by growing as writers. Now, they don't They don't just... But they also do talk about this stuff on social media. Now, the reason that not all of them talk about this stuff on social media is because they get so much hate. They don't want to be experiencing that. Right? I mean, would you say that, like... Yeah, like, they don't want to be experiencing that. If you're getting dogpiled and told how much you're shitty and that you're ruining your friend's legacy, you know, stepping over the bad faith criticism is not easy. That's hard. You know, how much energy do you have to ignore that stuff? They do the best they can. And it's a lot more than he is saying that they do. And he says he's a lifelong fan of Rooster Teeth and Monty Ohm. There are questions about how true that is. He has said some very bad things about both. He has also probably grown as a person since 2009, right? This video came out in 2020. And the things that I'm talking about are on a forum from 2009. That's like 11 years. People grow a lot in that time. Hell, the writers, Miles and Carey, grew a lot in that time. You don't know that, Bardock. You don't know that he didn't change. And again, I'm engaging with this video in good faith, right? The possibility, like, it is very unlikely for someone not to grow at all in 11 years. It's possible, but it's unlikely. So I'm operating in good faith and assuming that he is not the kind of person who would say for those who don't know, he said some pretty ableist things about Monty specifically back in 2009. With his YouTube channel, he made a video very specifically debunking and addressing the sort of, like, vaccines cause autism thing. So, like, whether or not he was the kind of person who would believe vaccines cause autism, he was the kind of person to make fun of autism in 2009. Even for someone who, like, whether Monty was autistic or not, I don't know. But, anyways, like, I would take that as probably some kind of indication of growth. And I also respect a little bit that people don't necessarily want to go back into their history and look at the people they were all the time, especially if that person is someone they don't want to be anymore. I can understand why that would be the case. But it does cast a little bit of doubt on his claim that he is a lifelong fan of Rooster Teeth and RWBY. I'm not going to use that as, like, an argument for him doing this in bad faith. But certainly it's a little bit like he is framing his history in a way of being respectful of Rooster Teeth and Monty, in a way that he has not always been. And yeah. And he, he says that he's coming at this in very good faith and trying to sort of be very respectful and stuff. I do want to say that later on, he gets extremely hostile towards this show. So, like, indications here that he's doing this really, like, out of a place of respect and love, considering how hostile he gets later, feel a bit iffy.
Hey, come on, I thought it was clever. Wait, is an intro playing now? Hasn't it been like 20 minutes?
Deep down inside a voice cries that tells you what's inside your heart. The world is frozen, you've been chosen, we must all now try to make a start. It's time for revolution, tear it all apart, so please tell me. Please tell me why hbomberguy isn't wanted by an anime. Reach for the sky, hbomberguy's gonna tell us why RWBY is lame. Please tell me why hbomberguy's disappointed by an anime. Reach for the sky, hbomberguy's gonna tell us why RWBY is lame. RWBY sucks.
First of all, dedicated to Monty Ohm. Considering the amount of shit he piles on Monty and piles on Carrie and Miles later, his friends, his the co-creators, dedicating it to Monty Ohm feels really shitty. Really shitty. And then, saying like, oh, he's gonna explain why RWBY sucks. Like, the thing is, so part of hbomberguy's persona, right? His online persona is exaggerated, right? It's an exaggerated persona of, being a little bit more antagonistic and a little bit more, whatever, than sort of a 100% reasonable person would be. That's part of his persona. It's part of what he sort of makes as an appeal of, like, it's the entertainment factor. So it's all sort of a little bit exaggerated. I'm trying to take that into account here. But there's just, like, there's this separation that I feel like is there between, I was disappointed by this show, and this show sucks. This show is lame. like, those feel like two different things to me, personally. So it's hard to take him seriously on this idea that, like, he's being upfront about his bias when he's not really just... I don't know. It just feels a little off. And some people will say, like, that it's not... like, that doesn't matter that much. And fine, I guess. That's your prerogative, you know? But, I don't know. It feels off to me, certainly.
RWBY is about a girl who goes to anime warrior school after getting invited by the ominous and enigmatic headmaster, Sephiroth Dumbledore, and RWBY and her sister and new friends mess about, doing plot lines that don't go anywhere for a few years, while the show decides what its story actually is. Okay, wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I wanted to start this video by doing the thing all the smart video essayists are doing nowadays, where they sum up the plot of the thing they're analysing in a funny way that lays the groundwork for future critique. But trying to delve into and describe the deeper story problems misses the surface problem that there basically isn't one. There's a really telling scene at the end of the second season where the main characters sit around discussing the events of the show so far and conclude that they don't really know what's happening or why and haven't figured anything out yet.
Okay, but that's part of the point? That's part of the point, is that things are being kept from them. That's a whole plot point, actually, in Volume 3 and then Volume 4 and then also, like, all the following volumes. All of them is, like, people weren't being honest with them, and, like, it created a really bad situation that nobody was really... that everyone was hiding everything, and basically sort of trying to, you know, and the idea that it, you know, that the plot wasn't there at all is just not true. It's just not true. It's just not true. You know, I believe there's plenty of evidence out there where, like, people talk, where the creators talk about what their you know, what their plans were from the start. You know, the themes that are explored later are also certainly there from the start. There's also, you know, these moments of, like, foreboding. Like, you know, like when Osmond says in Volume 2, Chapter 1, right, you know, Glinda says after the food fight, you know, they're supposed to be the defenders of the world, and Ozpin responds saying, and they will be, but for now they're just children, so why not let them play the part? After all, it isn't a role they'll have forever. And, like, that's a little bit of, like, foreboding. And, like, that's woven throughout the first 3 volumes. Just because the main characters don't know everything yet does not mean there is not stuff going on.
We didn't solve everything. A lot of people were hurt, and We still don't even know why they did this or who that mystery girl was.
The show attempts to justify this, though.
Not every story has a neat and tidy ending.
Stories don't have to make sense or go anywhere. Now, to a certain extent, this is an okay point to make. Like, in real life, things don't have arcs or necessarily lead anywhere. But if 28 episodes into your story, you're ending a season on a character giving what amounts to a justification for the story not mattering, maybe the plot could have done with some more work.
So this is something that we should keep in mind when we watch this. He never mentions how long the episodes are, how long each volume is. He never mentions it, at least as far as I remember. And maybe I'm wrong, but I was looking for that when I watched it last. And so when he says like 28 episodes in, right? Like, he's not really taking into account RWBY's format. Like, again, in Volume 1 was an hour and a half. That's it. Later on, there's a lot of comparisons with Avatar, right? Like, a lot of them. It's a whole thing. We'll get there when we get there. But Avatar's first season, the very first season, is as long as the first 3 volumes of RWBY put together in terms of runtime. Did the main characters of Avatar: The Last Airbender know everything that was going on by halfway through the first season? Did they know everything about the plot? No! The answer is no. The answer is no. Because that doesn't make sense. Why, like, because that's very early on in the story. Now, I understand that the volumes are more like seasons, and that there is time in between those. But the point is that the amount of runtime is important, right? How much time you actually have to explore these things, as well as the fact that RWBY has been stated many times, and from the start, and by Monty, as a show that is long-form storytelling. Things get more and more explored over time. Like, even if you don't trust the words of Miles and Gary, which you should, Monty, when he was alive, specifically highlighted that it was a show where everything gets revealed over time. Volume 2 is barely over 2 hours long. Yeah, so...
Dog mimicking Yang is really cute, though, so at least there's that.
Time for bed?
Oh, please.
Absolutely.
Yes.
This is the season 2 finale. We don't know what the story is. Nap time. Almost all of our main characters don't find out what the actual story that's going on actually is until about halfway through season 4, where someone tells them while sitting around a campfire.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening.
RWBY's story is one of those stories that I like to call theoretically interesting, where like if you read it on Wikipedia, it would sound really cool, and in the show there are plenty of times where the characters sit you down and tell you what the story was, and you go, oh, that's actually really interesting, I wish I'd seen some of that. But in the actual episodes of the show you get to see, not much happens at all. So to hone in on why the story ended up like this, we're gonna have to explore how the show was made. Monty Ohm was the main creator of RWBY, but it seems like he didn't do much of the writing himself. In interviews, Monty and the rest of Rooster Teeth have been upfront that Monty's not that interested in the writing part of making a show.
And we do stuff like writing characters and storylines and stuff that he doesn't really... I don't know if he's just not interested in it, but he doesn't do it. He likes all the animation.
Monty was more of a visual storyteller and seemed to prefer to have writers do the writing part, which means the show has some other important creators, Miles Luna and Kerry Shawcross.
Correct.
RWBY it's directed by Monty Ohm, and then Monty, Kerry, and myself are the lead writers for the show.
Kerry had done some editing and compositing work on Red vs. Blue, and Miles had done machinimating, like the head bobbing to the recorded dialogue, on Season 9. He then wrote 13 minutes worth of miniseries and helped co-write Season 10.
Playing on RWBY was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun.
It was really scary because it was essentially the first time that either of us had ever written anything.
Oh, I appear to have accidentally paused that clip.
Written anything
on
original,
this, or on this scale,
on this
especially
scale, for
too.
sure, yeah.
Why did you do that? Why did you do that? You It's not the first time they've written anything. So why did you pause it there and make it seem like that was anything credible? You're just trying to say they're shitty writers, and like... And again, like, you just, like, let's be clear here, right? He is making it clear that they were with Monty from the very start. He is saying that here. They were his trusted colleagues. I don't know. And, like, does he think that Monty had no say over the story? Do you think he wasn't working with, like, the actual, like, I don't know, man. I don't know. He creates such a separate, like, an artificial separation between Monty and Miles and Carrie, when we know that they were all working together. We know, yes, the actual writing was mostly Miles and Carrie, especially at the start. But you know, now there's been, like, other writers that have gotten involved, such as Eddie Rivas, for those who don't know. But, like, yeah, I don't know. Just feels off. Like, as if Monty didn't have like, control over the show. As if, like, as if he wasn't involved in the writing. Like, they did work together on developing the show and the story. It's just that the actual... Yeah, I don't know. And he talks a little bit more about some of this later, but he keeps that sort of separation between Monty and Miles and Carrie, which just wasn't there. They worked together. And yes, Monty's strength in storytelling is mainly visual storytelling. Like, and that's fine. But, like, again, he, Miles, and Carrie worked together. This was a group show. Monty did come up with the ideas. he was, I would say that Monty was probably the premier idea guy for the first 3 volumes of RWBY. Like, he was, I think, probably the main creative force. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't working with Miles and Carey. And also, right, what we're pointing out, what hbomberguy points out here, right, is that Miles and Carey, they had never done anything on this scale before, and they had never done anything of this kind before, and yet he's going to be judging it on on how well it holds up to things like Cowboy Bebop and Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like, what? Shouldn't you be judging it on how well people with that amount of experience are, like, shouldn't you be respecting that they were working from that amount of experience? Doesn't that matter to how you judge a show? Or any story? If it's like your first big project, doesn't that mean you should have room to grow?
There's a fourth really important team member who often goes unmentioned, even though he's in the credits of RWBY from even the first trailer, Shane Newville. He was a close friend of Monty's, and the two collaborated quite a lot on stuff. He'd worked with him on the animated parts of Red vs. Blue.
Monty or Shane will choreograph fights or whatever sequences.
And he's made some great stuff on his own. Monty first came up with some of the basic concepts for RWBY while eating in an IHOP with Shane. He doesn't get credited very often for—
hold on. Are you calling Shane like a co-creator? Because he's not. He's an animator who worked closely with Monty, but he is very explicitly not credited as a co-creator, not because he wasn't, like, part of everything, but because he was not part of the team that was coming up with the ideas. He was an animator. And like, he's not, like, I want to be clear here, right, that H-Bomb is not trying, he is not focusing on the letter that has caused so much, like, toxic discourse, but he is very specifically drawing attention to Shane specifically, in a way that feel like needs to be given weight in the context of the letter that Shane put out, and the impact that it had.
His role in the making of the series, but some of the best animated moments were made by him. So Monty came up with the basic ideas for RWBY's world and characters and story, and then brought on Carey and Miles as writers, and Shane as another animator.
The kind of thing we want to deliberate on and put more thought into is like the plot and character. And that's the stuff that Miles and Carey's been helping me with. So like,
Monty, Carey, and Miles appear to have worked together to come up with a basic outline of the plot and setting, but most importantly for Monty, the action sequences that were going to happen and when in the story they happened, and then Monty, Shane, and maybe a few others went off to start work on the action scenes, in doing so crafting some of the most cool and elaborate action sequences ever made. Meanwhile, the writers—
Okay, so he does talk about a lot of the stuff I just mentioned, actually.
And the rest of the animation team put together the rest of the scenes.
Eventually the three of us all decided on a few set rules and characters and story ideas that we wanted to stick to. Monty's working on, like, action and, like, the design and the look of the show, and he kind of had us go off and start writing the first episode.
Yeah.
This division of work does seem to make sense on the surface. However, something Miles is being nice and not mentioning is that sometimes Monty would just disappear and then come up with new characters, story elements, and action sequences, which the writers would then suddenly have to make room for in their script.
Okay, so interesting. So he is actually highlighting a lot of important stuff here. So first of all, he is up front that Shane is not one of the co-creators. But at the same time, he said, Shane goes uncredited a lot, and, like, Monty came up with some of the ideas in an IHOP with Shane. So, like, it's a little bit of an implication of, like, Shane has more to do with the creation of RWBY than he does, necessarily. But he's honest about that. He doesn't misrepresent Shane's role. I would also say, though, Shane doesn't really go uncredited a lot, because his letter saying that Miles and Carrie abandoned Monty's vision is often cited by a lot of people. So the fact that, like, the idea that he goes uncredited is not quite true, because a lot of people bring him up as a way to say the show isn't following what Monty wanted. So, like, a lot of people know about him. Now, I want to say here, right, like, the whole thing of, like, there's this division of, like, he has this separation between Miles and Carrie and Monty. Like, he uses this as his argument for that. And, like, yes, there was a bit, but that doesn't mean that they weren't working together, and that is going to come in, it is going to be important, I think, to remember that just because there was this division of labor doesn't mean that they weren't working together. And then it is, like, the whole thing of Monty, like, disappearing and then coming up with new ideas that Miles and Carrie would have to deal with, like, that's pretty important to you judging the quality of the writing. So, like, blaming, like, putting anything you don't like about the first 3 volumes purely on Miles and Carrie's shoulders is going to be, or at the very least should be, undermined by what you just said about Monty coming up with new ideas and Miles and Carrie having to deal with them.
More on that later. But for now, generally speaking, Monty and Shane did the fights, Carrie and Miles wrote the words, and another team of animators put together the non-action scenes.
The 3 of us would have a lot of meetings and collaborate on the show, to the point where I just started coming up with the broad strokes eventually, and they had pretty much written the bulk of the show.
Okay, so he came up with the broad strokes. So, like, that's important, right? That's important. The actual, like, words, but the direction of the show was developed by the 3 of them.
So, in Monty's own words, the bulk of the show is written by these writers. To a certain extent, it's a bit like if Dead Fantasy was a full animated series, with writers hired to connect the dots and explain and justify the fights that were happening. So there's a lot of good places to start when analysing the show's...
Okay, see, yeah, like that's a misrepresentation there, right? That's a misrepresentation. Miles and Carrie weren't just connecting the dots between the fight scenes. That's not what Monty just said. What he said was that they had meetings, he developed the broad strokes of the story, and then Miles and Carrie wrote the scripts. The connection points, the things that connected the fight scenes were not just, Miles and Carrie didn't just have to come up with things that that connected the fight scenes. That's not what Monty just said. In the clip that was just played.
Writing process, but the best place is probably the very beginning of the show. I know, right? I'm a genius. The opening of RWBY really doesn't set up the story too well, but it does set up the writing problems we'll go on to see throughout the story in a useful way. RWBY begins with a very simplistic looking introductory animation explaining the basic setting of the world, with the slight problem that it doesn't actually do that at all. All it actually says is there's man, and also dangerous monsters that want to eat them up, called Grimm, as in Grimm's fairy tales, which is kinda cute, and then man discovered dust, a magical substance, well, magical-ish, we'll get to that later, which can be used to defeat them in some vague way.
This power was appropriately named Dust.
Why is that an appropriate name? Hang on.
Man, born from dust, was strong, wise, and resourceful.
Okay, so it's called Dust because we, came from dust. Man. And that's the intro. You'd think they'd explain a little bit more about the world itself, or what the setting is like, and as they zoom out on a world map, you briefly see 4 castles, so what's going on there? Are they countries? But before you can be told anything more important than dust, they evaporate, and we transition to the first real scene of the story.
Okay, but, you're judging this first scene, right, on whether it does what you expected it to do, which was to set up the world. But it doesn't. It's not designed to do that. It's a very quick little introduction, a little bit, but what it's really introducing is the themes of the show. It is about, that's why it ends with the whole thing about there's no victory in strength, and the thing about a more honest soul. This intro is not really designed to tell you everything about the world. So yeah, if you're judging it on how well it sets up the world, then yeah, it fails at that, but that's not what it's for. If it was for that, it would do a lot more of that. So we and we come to this later, but he specifically is judging this. This comes a lot later in the video, but he's specifically judging this as something that is copying the intro of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And it's not that. It's not that at all. But that's how he's judging it, and he comes to that later. But so the Avatar: The Last Airbender intro is very specifically about setting up the world and about all that stuff. But this is, the reason that this focuses on dust is because it is about, the resourcefulness of humanity and the resilience and the ingenuity and all that stuff. And that's all important to the story in terms of priming the audience for what to pay attention to in terms of the story. It's things are, yeah, I don't know. God.
The intro doesn't share information which might have been really good to know going in so people aren't confused when it suddenly comes up later. For example, there's a third species separate from humans or Grimm called the Faunus, whose existence and treatment by humans is supposedly one of the driving elements of the entire plot. The first time this plot element, or even what a Faunus is, comes up is about 11 episodes into the show.
It must be hard to be a faunus.
Your first reaction to a core plot point is, to be a what? What's that? The Faunus are mentioned once at the end of episode 1 on TV, when a piece of concept art briefly brings up something called the Faunus protests.
This Saturday's Faunus Civil Rights protest.
Sorry, but... Okay, you see a girl who has... Like, unlike a lot of the other characters, right? Has some kind of animal feature, right? Which, by the way, is also present here in this image. Right? So, when you hear the word faunus, you don't... Like, yeah, you don't have a free explanation, but you could probably assume that the faunus are humans with animal features. Because what we just established was that Velvet there was a faunus, and the thing that makes her different from the human characters is that she has some animal features. So, like... what do you mean you're questioning what a faunus is? Seriously? Like, can you not put that together?
Turn dark. But before they can actually tell you what that is, it cuts out, and then they don't come up again until near the end of the season. So it's almost like a surprise when they come back up. For another example, in RWBY's setting...
Oh, although, actually, here's the thing. If you actually wanted to do a good criticism here, you could have said, hey, like, here are our heroes. Our heroes, right? Who are learning how to fight against injustice and stuff like that. And they're sitting here as someone gets bullied and not doing anything about it. Why aren't they doing anything about it? Like, isn't this what they're training to be able to do something about? To fight, not just to fight monsters, but to protect people who need protection. Like, that's a legitimate criticism there. And he doesn't say anything about that. Why not? That would be a good criticism. To have your heroes not stand up for someone being bullied? To just turn away and say, boy, must be hard to be a faunus. Like, that's a writing issue, I would say.
Every character has a power called a semblance, an ability completely unique to them. What a semblance is, or the fact they exist at all, or how this universe's version of magic even works, isn't mentioned in the slightest in the opening, where that might have been nice. And the name Semblance isn't even said in the show until episode 14, sorry I stuttered. The Four Kingdoms.
So, again, right, he says episode 14, but he doesn't explain at all that these aren't normal length episodes, especially in Volume 1, right? There isn't a standard length of episodes until Volume 2. In Volume 1, you have episodes everywhere from like 2 minutes to 17 minutes or something. So when you say episode 14, like, that's not 14 22-minute episodes like you might have in, say, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Which, again, he talks about a lot later. And so there's just this very important piece of context that he's leaving out.
And their relationships with each other and their fragile peace barely comes up until that peace is fractured in Season 3, where you suddenly learn, as it's happening, that this peace was incredibly easy to fracture and was hanging by a thread.
Our kingdoms are at the brink of war.
Wait, what? Are they? What's happening? These all would have been really useful to know going into the story, or at least should be properly set up at some point and not just dumped on you the instant they become relevant. But instead, basic aspects of the setting start to feel almost like twists when they suddenly come up multiple hours in, with...
Do you know how world building works? I feel like you should know how world building works. Where things come up when they're relevant. And then you slowly learn about the world because they just came up. That's what world building is. I feel like if every story just was like, they started the story with, here's how everything works in this world, like, that doesn't feel organic at all. Like, at all. You know, RWBY starts with saying, you know, here's what the names of all the kingdoms are, and here's how all the different parts of this world are, and like it doesn't feel organic. It feels, yeah, it, I don't know, just doesn't.
No groundwork laid for you whatsoever, and the main opportunity to set some of this stuff up and get the audience on the same narrative page, the intro, gets thrown away to give you a commercial for Dust. Why? Well, the first scene in the show is the main villain of the first season robbing a dust store and RWBY fighting them. Now, in abstract, this opening scene itself is a fine idea. It's a very common and punchy way to start a story, have a crime happen and the main character stopping it. It's immediately engaging, it draws the viewer in with action and stakes, and it's a strong way of establishing the primary hero and villain of a story. Now, they could be robbing a bank, or a convenience store, or a gas station, or a jewelry store, or an analogue for these things that's appropriate to the setting, but the decision was made to have it be a dust store. And this is a decent choice too, it's an important thing within the setting. However, this does pose a problem for your audience, because now you're opening on the attempted theft of a fantasy resource which has no point of easy comparison to anything in real life. You know how everyone knows what the One Ring is, because it's a ring that has evil magical properties, so you kind of get it? Not quite as many people engaged with the Silmarils, did they? God, even admitting I know what that is embarrasses me. If you just opened on this robbery without the intro, people would get the gist of robbery and girls stopping them, but not what dust is, or what it does, or why it's so important. But you kinda have to start with the dust store because it's a unique place for the setting, which could be interesting if it's pulled off well, and the plan of the main villain for this season is that he's stealing all the dust from everywhere, so it's economically good storytelling to open on one of those attempted thefts. So in order for everyone to know what dust is and why it's important, the intro animation for the entire series was either written or rewritten to primarily focus on explaining dust, which...
But again, okay, I already went over what the intro was for, and so he's judging it on unreasonable terms, and thus it is failing at what he expected it to be rather than what it is.
Which is a tremendously poor idea, because now nothing else is explained. When it comes down to it, there's stuff much more important to set up in the story than some guy robbing a store. Compounding this is that the plot of the entire first season is this bad guy, Clockwork Orange Man, is trying to steal dust. Why? Well, you'll find out in season never, because they dropped that plot point.
So this has actually been talked about a few different times in the RWBY fandom, because not everyone actually does quite put together what the dust was used for. There's a couple of reasons. The first is to cause general unrest, which is important to the villains, as you find out when you continue to watch the show. Is to cause anxiety and unrest and general disruptions of peace. Which, by the way, is also why Cinder says, you know, our kingdoms are on the brink of war. They're not. That's factually untrue, as we see. But it's really useful to make people nervous. Like, think about it. If you're under the belief that everything in the world is peaceful, and then suddenly you hear, wait a second, what? What do you mean we're at war? Or we're almost at war? What don't I know? You know, So especially from like the fact that Cinder was able to like hijack this whole thing, and which is a whole thing that happens later and all that stuff, but like it, yeah. And then the other thing that the dust is for is at the end of Volume 2, there's a whole thing where, like, again, it's a whole thing about causing disruption and breaking peace and causing anxiety, where there's a train that is loaded with the dust, and there's a whole, like, breach that causes a lot of Grimm to be attracted and have to be fought off.
I'm not even kidding. They changed their mind about the plot, so none of this matters. So yeah, on top of the obviously quite large problem that the writers didn't know what their story was going to be until after they'd finished writing a season of it, the chance to set up and explain the wider setting so people know a little more is squandered in order to explain why the next scene in the show is supposed to be important.
By the way, praised Red versus Blue earlier. That's actually what he's criticizing RWBY for here, which is that they didn't actually have a bigger plot in mind, and then they actually retconned one in. That actually happened with Red versus Blue. It did not happen with RWBY, but it did happen with Red versus Blue, which he didn't talk about, making it seem like this is a, yeah, anyways. Just thought I'd point that out, that actually Red versus Blue, which he praised earlier, did actually retcon a bigger story in, that was not planned from the start.
And then it turns out not to be anyway. This is the opposite of economical storytelling. This is expensive storytelling. This jumbled mess of ideas, plot decisions, intro priorities, and later changes makes the intro feel like a first draft that they couldn't change. In the commentary track, they talk a lot about how cool it was that they got the voice actress for Cortana from Halo to do the opening voiceover, and it seems like she might have had a pretty busy schedule, so I have the sinking feeling that they wrote the intro and then recorded it and then realized that maybe it could have done with some more work and it was too late. That's just my speculation there, though. But this stuff needs to be the strongest, because it's the best chance you have to sell an audience on your setting and story. The only thing really holding up its end here is Monty's fight with the robbers, which is really good, and also the transition to the fight from the scene in the store employs a really cool technique I love called shifting diegesis, because you think that you're just hearing the music, but it's actually playing on RWBY's headphones. That and the fight are really cool, and because of the intro not being super great, I think it's the only thing that really hooks people in the first few minutes. No one's watching the intro and going, oh wow, dust, sold. The show ends up having a lot...
Okay, but like that's your experience. You can't... Like, assuming that's everyone's experience is just... Like, that's what I was talking about earlier, where he sort of frames a lot of things as objective that just aren't. Yeah.
Lot of interesting ideas, but those ideas are executed on and explained to you extremely poorly in a way that really lets the show down. I'm gonna say this right now, RWBY's story gets interesting. RWBY is a really fun show to write a wiki about. There's some great stuff in there over the years, but the storytelling only gets worse, and the setting is one of the most poorly communicated the world had ever seen before Bright came out. Let's talk about world building, and more importantly, how you convey that world to the viewer. A thing lots of good fiction stories for young adults try to do is craft a story where you learn how things work without being explicitly told. The setting of, say, Avatar, to pick a completely random example, doesn't tell you exactly how everything works, because this world is normal to the people living in it, so no one would need to stop and ask what's going on. Sometimes you meet people who can throw fire at you, and that's just not that surprising. There's a nation full of people who can do that. And hey, you probably have a relative who can throw rocks without touching them. That's life, man. So for the sake of the audience, the story is written so the unique aspects of the world come up in ways where the audience learns how things work.
Oh, you mean like how the Faunus happened? in RWBY. Like how those were introduced to the audience. Like that.
It's water bending, and it's...
Yeah, an ancient art unique to our culture, blah, blah, blah.
This example from the first episode is a little clumsy and obvious compared to the rest of the show, but it's really solid exposition, especially for a show that children might be watching. You now know what waterbending is, and that it's unique to a culture, and that this is all so normal in this world that even teenagers are casually dismissive about this information. And you learn all of this without even feeling like you're being told. You think you're just watching two siblings arguing about how to catch a fish, you fucking idiot, but you're secretly having the main concepts of the world explained to you. It's clever. Katara's trying to catch a fish with waterbending, but in real life, the viewer is the fish out of water. Who let you in here? I once heard someone smarter than me calling this naturalistic storytelling. The story never condescends to its audience by pausing to tell you how the world works. Instead, it just tells the story in a way that makes it easier to understand how it works. But if you're a talentless hack, there are other ways of writing exposition. In, say, Harry Potter, Harry is a person from our world learning about a much more magical one hidden behind his own. So the viewer is told how some things work by way of Harry learning, because Harry doesn't know and needs to be told. So we get scenes where people tell Harry how the world works. Now,
that's not, like, that's a normal thing. To have an audience POV. Maybe he touches upon that, but like here, it just feels like you're criticizing a normal thing for stories to have, an audience insert, so that it, like, I don't know, just like that's what it feels like here. Maybe he goes on and is better about that. Also, in terms of the goblins, it is, they are racist in the sense that anti-Semitism is a form of racism, but the problem is that most people don't make that, don't have that understanding that anti-Semitism is a form of racism. So it's like, saying this isn't racist, like that, I feel like that, like this is just a little gripe, because this obviously isn't about Harry Potter. But I just think that it would have made more sense to say this isn't anti-Semitic. How dare you, or whatever. Like, but I don't know. It's a very small criticism, because this isn't about that at all. It's just a little thing, and it has nothing to do with media literacy. Ooh, shoot, or anything like that.
Now, I personally think it's better to discover things without having the character just be told, but a lot of Harry Potter takes place at a school, so almost all interesting storytelling is kept to a minimum. Harry Potter isn't as good as when you read it as a child, the hottest take of 2014. The exposition in RWBY is, well, there's a character in the story called Jean Arc. Do you get it? Who inexplicably doesn't live in. And at several points early in the story, another character takes him aside to tell him how things work.
Do you know what aura is?
For example...
So, funny thing, there was a cameo thing, you know, the platform cameo, where I think it was Miles actually talked about that, about sort of making Jean sort of the dumb guy so that they could explain everything, which, funnily enough, is the exact kind of addressing good faith criticism that hbom says that they don't do. Now, for what it's worth, that happened more recently, so after this video came out, but it's not the first time they did it. It's just one example of, like, that being something they actually do.
In an early scene, this character, Pyrrha, explains aura to him. She gives a long speech about how aura is a manifestation of your spiritual energy. nay, your soul. Basically, you have a shield for a while in fights, like in Halo. I guess old habits die hard.
Aura is the manifestation of our soul. It bears our burdens and shields our Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Our aura can be our shield. Everyone has it. Even animals. The monsters we fight lack a soul. Creatures with manifestation they are the dark. It's not about understanding. So by bearing light, soul manifest our aura.
It's like a force field.
Okay, Miles, Kerry, you just made your whole audience sit through that exposition. You can't then make a joke about how simple the explanation could have been. Also,
Okay, but like that stuff that Pyrrha says is actually important. Like, you can criticize it being a little clunky, and Jean maybe should have known it because of the family he has, where people are like, there's a whole thing about, you know, coming from like warriors and stuff like that he's very insecure about. But the stuff Pyrrha actually says is important here. Jean simplifying it like that is a joke, because like, yeah, on a practical front, that's how it operates, is out of the force field. But as part of the world building, it's actually kind of important that Aura is a manifestation of a soul specifically, and it also highlights that Grimm don't have souls, which is, you know, like the soul is an important part of RWBY's world building. So like, yeah, again, it's like, it's this weird thing of where he's putting the criticism. There are things worth criticizing here, but it's just that he's focusing on things that are kind of very cheap shots, and don't hold up super well.
So, when you're doing exposition, you still have to think about the character who's saying it and why. You know, Pyrrha's a teenager. Young adults don't tend to walk around with entire speeches about how their world works prepared in case someone asks. That's just really strange characterization.
Yeah, but that's who Pyrrha is. She's, this comes, you know, again, you know this because you've watched the whole show. She is an extremely experienced warrior. Like, she's not... She didn't get to grow up as a normal teenager. Like, that's a whole important part of her story.
Also really strange writing-wise for Jean to not know this. Jean is the latest in a long line of heroic monster hunters,
yeah,
and is in anime
there you
warrior
go.
School because he wants to live up to this legacy.
My father, my grandfather, and his father before him were all warriors. They were all heroes.
Yeah, like, that's fair criticism. That right there is actual fair criticism.
I wanted to be one too.
There's no way he didn't, at some point, pick up this concept growing up or in training. Or, you know, it is a core aspect of, like, life in this world. Jean's character not knowing is such poor characterization that it literally doesn't make sense. You know, in Harry Potter, Harry was a literal child who was deliberately sheltered from magic all his life, so his not knowing stuff was explained by the story. That's kind of the only way this expository style works. You have to incorporate them not knowing into the character, or it doesn't make sense. If you want to explain one of the world's mechanics, it's not great to do it by having a character whose whole life revolves around knowing this information, not know it, and for the first person he ever asks about it to happen to have a speech prepared. Jean's idiocy is often used to try to make hilarious jokes about man not know thing.
What do you mean, like, the first person he ever... I don't think he asks her about it. She brings it up, and he pretends to know about it, and then she realizes that he's pretending to know about it, so she tells him.
There's no way I put my gear in locker 636 yesterday. I would have remembered having to count that high.
Ha 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 ha. But more than for a joke, it's also a vehicle for someone to have an excuse to give really straightforward sounding exposition for the audience. In the scene where Jean first meets Pyrrha, Weiss tells him who Pyrrha is.
This is Pyrrha. Hello. show again?
Kira graduated top of her class at Sanctum.
Never heard of it.
Do you know who Pyrrha is? Let me tell you, and also the viewer, who she is, and list some of her accomplishments.
She's won the Mistral Regional Tournaments 4 years in a row. A new record.
The what?
It's not just that Jean's characterization suffers from him being written to be literally born yesterday, it's that everyone else's characterization suffers too, when they essentially have to pause being their own characters in order to explain the story to someone. Pyrrha, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting characters in the show, but so much of the time she could have spent, like, being interesting or doing something interesting, is spent obsessed with teaching Jean everything he needs to know and how to fight. I've seen people call this show progressive and feminist because it has a lot of female main characters, but looking at how they're written, I don't think I can agree there. This strong female character is basically immediately reduced to doing all of the emotional and physical labor for this guy.
Yeah, okay, this is... okay. RWBY is progressive. It is feminist. There is one character who is mostly focused on a guy, and that's Pyrrha. You're sort of categorizing every female character as, like, I don't know. It just feels a little like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater there. And, like, there's more, like, I don't know. There's more to RWBY being a relatively forward-thinking show than there's a lot of women in it. And of course he goes on later and sort of tries to say that basically the reason there's a lot of women in it is because the writers are sort of hot for the characters, which we'll get there when we get there. There is some validity to Pyrrha's focus on Jean being a little bit much. But it's not that she doesn't have any of her own character work. And actually her character work is tied to everything with Jean. Specifically, like, she is drawn to him, and this is pointed out in Volume 2, even if it's not necessarily shown as much. Like, Pyrrha is known everywhere she goes. And with Jean, she gets to start from scratch and just have a relationship. And, like, while we don't see Pyrrha always on that pedestal that she talks about as much in the show, just because of constraints that were there in early volumes, the fact that, like, Weiss immediately knows who she is, and, like, throws a ton of praise her way and is upset at Jean for not knowing who she is, like, that does show us a little bit of, like, of Pyrrha's struggles, of, like, she can't exist without getting praise. She just wants to be a person. She enjoys the starting from scratch with Jean. She enjoys that, and that's fine. That's okay. That's not, you know... She does have her own character, is, I guess, the point I'm trying to make. Yes, it's connected with Jean, but she does have her own character. Yeah. I would also say, though, that Weiss does not just stop being Weiss to give Jean exposition about Pyrrha. That moment is actually quite in character for Weiss in Volume 1. She is particularly obsessed with Pyrrha and wants to be on a team with Pyrrha because she has such respect for her. So that's a whole thing. And so someone not knowing who Pyrrha is, and specifically Jean, who Weiss has issues with, especially during Volume 1, and also a bit during Volume 2, like, that's in character with Weiss. She doesn't stop being Weiss just to give exposition.
A huge portion of the early show's screen time is dedicated not to the main characters of RWBY, who the show is named for, but to Jean, the real main character, getting trained and explained to and flirted with by Pyrrha, the coolest girl in school.
Yeah, that's just not... Like, that's not... Jean is not, quote-unquote, the real main character. He's just not. That ignores so much. Just ignores so much. So much.
Incidentally, Jean is voiced by Miles Luna, the lead writer of the show.
Hey, Pyrrha.
What's up, girl? How you doing? She's so pretty.
Closely.
She's so pretty.
It's trying to basically prove that RWBY is not a feminist show. This is the whole, Jean is a self-insert thing, which is a whole conversation that I'm not ready to have here. But he's not. He's not a self-insert. He's definitely not. He's just voiced by a creator. He didn't even cast himself in that role. And remember, Monty came up with the whole with the general guidelines of the story. Remember? And Monty was actually around for Volume 1 through 3, so like he had say in this. And he helped cast it. He specifically sought out a bunch of specific people for a bunch of voices, actually, including all the 4 main girls. He specifically sought out a bunch of people for that. So he probably had say in terms of Miles being cast as Jean. And we actually do know that there's a stream somewhere, I think, or an interview somewhere, where Miles tried out a few different voices for Jean. He was talking about how he tried out a few different voices for Jean, and the one he ended up doing was the one he didn't really love doing. So he didn't decide on that. He was cast in that role. Yep. So this is, H-bomb here is sort of connecting correlation with causation here.
She's so pretty.
So even while having a comic...
And yes, like, it's a little uncomfortable for them to be saying something like that about an underage girl that was back during Volume 2. Again, like, if you're not gonna like bring up stuff about like how you used to talk about RWBY and Monty compared to how you talk about today, or like the fact that like Shane wrote this letter that's caused a lot of toxicity, and that he might have changed today. But then you want to show something from Volume 2 as, like, evidence of the creators not practicing what they preached, or you know, not being sort of on the general right side of history and actually being kind of misogynistic or whatever. You know, but that was all the way back in, was that like, God, was it like 20, it was the mid 2010s, probably the early mid 2010s. Don't know exactly when Volume 2 came out, but it was a long time ago. Certainly over half a decade. So, you know, is that still who they are? Is that what you're arguing? Be clear.
Relief character who doesn't know things he definitely would, so people can explain it to him, the show is still struggling for good opportunities to explain the setting and plot. Luckily for exposition's sake, but not the viewers, they have, like Harry Potter, set a majority of the early show in a school, so often the viewer is in a literal classroom, being lectured to. And no, it doesn't become fun when the characters in the scene are bored of it too. However, because they're trying to make the exposition naturalistic, you're also expected to immediately grasp multiple abstract concepts that aren't explained at all. Take, for example, semblances. What's a semblance? Okay, well, they're not magic. Something the show is very careful to explain is that they're not magic because people don't think magic is real in this setting.
We have dust, semblances, but I mean, there's no such thing as magic.
To them, semblances are normal and magic would be really weird. But just for my own entertainment, 3 of the things I just showed you were semblances and 1 of them was magic. Good luck figuring out which is which without being explicitly told by the story. Every character in RWBY has one really unique special ability. Blake can leave shadow clones behind and use dust to augment their elemental abilities. Yang can go Super Saiyan and get more powerful when she's angry, but then later they re-explained that it's her getting stronger as she gets hurt more, like she channels the damage.
With each hit, she gets stronger, and she uses that energy to fight back.
Then later they change it again to how it is her getting angry. Her father calls it basically a temper tantrum.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing. Honestly, he's just, yeah. In terms of visually creating distinctions between magic, dust, and semblances, I do a little bit agree. I think that visually it would be better to have some kind of better distinction between them, how they look. I will, however, say that I think that there is I think like there is discussion, like dust and semblances are sort of like the remains of a world with magic, right? We find that out later, right? It's the stuff left over from the world before it was wiped out. And they are sort of like pieces of magic, kind of. But specifically dust, right? Which was actually explained in the intro, right? It's like elemental energy that is, it's energy. It's energy. And actually that is specifically explained by Weiss in, I'm going to say the 3rd episode. She's ranting at RWBY and she explains what dust is. But yeah, visually, I would say he's right about visually. That there is not enough distinction, I don't think. I think that's a decent point. And it can be a little bit confusing, specifically where the line is between, in particular, semblances and magic. And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair criticism. I don't think it's a horrible writing issue, but I think it's a fair criticism. In terms of Yang's semblance, though, first of all, yeah, I mean, it's as we see later, right? Like after this whole thing with her father, Yang figures out how to, like, she sort of develops a way to use her semblance in a way that does not have her losing control. Before this, and there's conversations worth having and that have been had about specifically how Tai treats Yang in this whole part of Volume 4. But like Yang's semblance is not her getting angry. It does work with the absorbing damage. It's just that she tends to activate it getting upset. I believe, as far as I can tell, and I don't really understand how it's conveyed otherwise, especially with the fact that she later in the show she's triggering it without losing her temper. It's not that her semblance is her temper. It's that often she activates it when she loses her temper. So learning how to, like, there's a whole thing here of, like, Yang learning how to develop learning how to activate her semblance without losing her temper. Like, it's a whole thing. But there's maybe conversations to have here, but, like, the point is that Yang's semblance is not a temper tantrum.
Basically a temper tantrum.
Oh, and then they change it back again in Volume 6.
His semblance is like yours. He absorbs energy through his sword, stores it up, and then sends it back when he's ready.
So if you're confused about how the main character's semblances actually work, it's okay, so were the writers. This isn't just me nitpicking. This lack of internal logic when it comes to something even as simple as one of our 4 main characters' abilities makes the show very confusing to watch. When you're watching Yang fighting, you don't know whether to feel if she's actually in trouble or if she's waiting to unleash her power. And that means it's kind of hard to ever really know what level of danger one of your main characters is in. And that really sucks. Oh, also, another expository...
No. The whole thing of aura is that, like, there is a visual... there's a way that they visually convey when the aura breaks. And, like, when aura breaks, that's when you know that your character is really in danger. That the character is really in danger. That's pretty well established. Especially by this point. By the way, right, here we are. This is Volume 6. Right? He said that he was going to focus mostly on Volume 1 through 3. Why are you talking about Volume 6 here? I thought this was a whole different set of criticisms. So, really, he is very much conveying that these problems that he is pointing out happen throughout the entire show. Not just Volume 1 through 3, even though that's what he said he was going to be focusing on, and that there were 2 separate sets of issues.
problem is in this scene too. A guy who can move this quickly is currently fighting Yang. He's just off screen while this is happening. Did he stop so Blake can tell Yang his semblance? Is he just waiting for the exposition to finish? Listen, guys, I'm not trying to be mean, but like, show one other person your script before you're done. Like, just show it to one person. Ruby's power is she can move really quickly and turns into a weird orb made of cloth and rose petals as she does it. Weiss can make symbols appear that either lock things in place or stick people to things, but also she can summon monsters? But this isn't magic, it's not magic! Glinda Goodwitch, yeah, really clever, well, she can basically do magic, like control things and shoot energy and put broken things back together and instantly kill monsters, but it's not magic! And Pyrrha is basically Magnet Man from the X-Men. So this is a totally cool thing to put in your fantasy setting. It's very shonen anime, it really fits. It's a fine idea. So how is this explained to you by the story? Well, they don't. The intro doesn't mention it, along with most things, and for the vast majority of the first season, it's not mentioned at all. You see some crazy magical looking stuff happening, and you assume based on people's reactions that some people can do magic in this world, and that's fine. But then, 14 episodes...
What you just showed was specifically part of the explanation of aura. Assuming that aura is magic, remember that whole thing you just said wasn't important? Pyrrha's whole speech wasn't important about how aura works? Was Jean just saying, oh, it's like a force field? You just showed an example of why that speech is important, because guess what? It actually explains why that's not magic. It's a manifestation of the soul. That's not magic. And you would know that if you paid attention.
Into the show, Pyrrha saves Jorn's life by manipulating his shield from afar with her Magnet Man powers, which we didn't know she had until this moment either, by the way, and all the other characters react.
Yes, because she keeps it secret. Again, if you assuming you watched the show, which you did, that is actively a plot point later.
To this as if it's a crazy unique thing.
What?
Despite tons of magical shit happening before that, and one of the people in this scene surprised by Pyrrha's power can seemingly also do magic, and they have this conversation about it.
It's not, like... One of the things that I'm really noticing here is that he finds something that is a decent criticism. Like, there's plenty of stuff that's not. But, like, he's finding a few things that are, like, decent criticism, like how the exposition is delivered, and, like, the fact that John is portrayed as a little bit too stupid in Volume 1 to allow for that exposition to exist. Or, like, the way that magic doesn't have a clear, distinct visual style from Dust and Semblances, but he's just harping on it for such long periods of time, which makes it really feel like like he's trying to convey that these are huge issues, and I just don't think they are. Like, certainly not as big as he's making them out to be. And he's sort of saying, oh, this is symptomatic of a more consistent issue throughout all of RWBY. But he really over-focuses and really harps on specific things for long periods of time that, like, okay, so, like, magic isn't, like, super well conveyed. What's different? But, like, again, we did know what aura is. And while it's not, like, introduced necessarily in... Like, a lot of this stuff is introduced in slightly clunky ways, but becomes clearer later. As the writers grow. I don't know. It just feels... ugh.
Yes.
How did you... Well,
RWBY has her speed. You have your glyphs. My semblance is polarity.
This is the first time in the show anyone has mentioned semblances. This just happens. Nobody watching the show knows what that word means yet. So then, bam! Right as you're maybe getting to grips with everything else you've been told, brushed up on your in-show RWBY 101 classes, it turns out fundamental things you thought you knew about the setting, like that there's magic and that's fine, were lies! And actually every...
So you mean assumptions you made? Like, I get why you would make some of those assumptions, but they're still assumptions being made that actually were just not how this world works, because they hadn't quite gotten to that yet. Again, also, this all being in Volume 1, he's also, again, leaving out the actual amount of runtime that they've actually had to tell the story. In Volume 1 in particular.
Single character in the world has one unique thing they can do with its own special name that is explicitly not the same thing as magic, but just to fuck with you, magic does also exist in addition to all this. The idea's completely fine, but this is not how you convey it to an audience. This scene is supposed to be about Jean's personal growth as a character, but instead, first-time viewers are going to be going, hang on, what's a semblance? I thought people could just do magic. Imagine if the first time anyone said bending in Avatar: The Last Airbender was 14 episodes in. But in addition, Pyrrha...
Again, right, Avatar: The Last Airbender has 22-minute episodes. 14 episodes into Avatar: The Last Airbender is a lot longer in than 14 episodes into RWBY Volume 1.
Also specifically is keeping her semblance a secret.
We gotta tell them what happened. We could. Or perhaps we could just keep it our little secret.
She doesn't broadcast her power, so
Oh.
it puts her opponents at a disadvantage.
There you go.
But then later, when some other characters figure out what her power is, they call it by the same name.
Her semblance is polarity.
So it's a secret, but everyone knows the specific name of Pyrrha's ability with...
Come on, that's a nitpick, right? They figure it out and they use the correct name for it. That's a serious nitpick. And again, like, you just had a whole criticism of how this is the first time we find out that Pyrrha can do this. And now you're going on, you're saying, oh yeah, right, she keeps it a secret. That's why it's not, you know...
Without needing to be told it once they see her do it? What I'm trying to say is, semblances are kind of a semi-complicated concept to just drop on people. They don't have to be. There are tons of shows and anime where every character has a unique ability of some sort. There's this great narrative technique that a lot of anime utilizes nowadays, where they explain what is happening in them. In JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, almost every main character has a power called a stand. But the way they introduce it is they have a character getting confused by these weird powers he has, and then two other characters turn up to explain what a stand is to him, so he gets it, thus helping to ensure that you also know how stands work, so that the audience knows what's happening in the story. So yeah, it's not like...
Wait a second. Isn't that what you just complained about happening with Jean? That he didn't know what, like, aura was? And all that stuff? And other characters had to stop and explain it all to him? Isn't that what you just complained about? Now you're saying JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is better? Because people develop these unique powers and then people come and they stop the whole thing and they explain what a stand is? What?
every character having a power is a bad story idea, but Semblances are specifically made stranger by either the lack of exposition or the presence of incredibly confusing exposition. Like in Volume 5, they explain what Semblances are to another character, presumably because they realized the audience had never been actually told what Semblances were in the show for 5 seasons. Can you see the problem here? When these ideas and story components are being explained so strangely, and it's taking seasons to correct, eventually the viewer either stops watching or stops caring about really understanding what's going on. They start to treat it like it's not really worth their time, and tune it out while they wait for the next cool fight. Good exposition and...
Were you really not able to put together what Semblances were until Volume 5? Really?
And proper conveyance of information are so important in stories, especially fantasy stories. If you do it in a boring way, or do it badly, or don't do it at all, or explain only one thing in the introduction of your whole series and then it turns out not to be as big a plot point as you'd thought, the audience's experience of your potentially good story is damaged, and it's really hard to get that goodwill back when you've lost it. I'm only realizing now, writing this video, exactly how cool RWBY's story could have been if it was written in a way that wasn't such a struggle to get to grips with. The show is having such a problem conveying its world that you have to watch another different show to learn basic shit.
Just want to point out that the scene that was just this one here, right? This scene is actually an incredible example of exposition, delivered really efficiently. They're playing a board game, and there's incredibly efficient exposition about the entire world of Remnant, and all 4 of the kingdoms. Which again, I'll tackle that another time. But it's incredible, actually, example of world building really efficiently.
Having such a problem conveying its world that you have to watch another different show to learn basic shit. Despite spending tons of time sitting you down telling you how the world works, they still don't manage to tell you enough about the setting for you to be able to understand it. So they made a second companion show consisting entirely of lectures called RWBY World of Remnant.
Right. Because... I thought you said that they didn't address the criticisms. So are they addressing criticisms or not? Because right now you're talking about how they're addressing criticisms. They realized that things weren't clear enough, so they made sure to to add, supplementary material that made things a bit clearer. Because they couldn't just... Because if they put things in the main show, it would be even clunkier because they'd already gone past the point where explaining those would make any kind of narrative sense. So here they are addressing one of your criticisms that you said they didn't address earlier.
Everyone's favourite part of watching a cartoon. The homework, like what all the countries are, and how they work, how huntsman academies work, and the basic history of the world, along with the major mechanics of the show, like what Grimm actually are, what Faunus are, how aura works, what a semblance is.
And also, again, there's extra details, but most of this you can pick up on in the show if you're paying attention.
Oh, and how could we forget the cross-continental transmit system? The creators seem to have realized that this isn't explained very well in the story that they wrote, so they essentially made a private personal Wikipedia to tell you what was happening. In the commentary track for Volume 2, they basically admit that World of Remnant exists to patch up all of these holes.
We have the World of Remnant videos to kind of get some exposition across as best we could.
As best we could? Guys, no one was forcing you to write the story badly. They're even...
Again, right? A, they're inexperienced. B, the amount of time they actually had in Volume 1 to deliver this kind of exposition was much smaller than you're really recognizing. I mean, you know, and C, right? They recognized the flaw in their writing and made sure that there was material that would help with that, because they were addressing criticism, which you said they didn't do. They don't do it on social media. Is that where they should be addressing criticism? Rather than, you know, just giving some supplementary material to help anything that wasn't super clear? It's not like the World of Remnant shorts are very long. They're shorts. They're quite short. It's not a whole lot of homework. And it's barely homework. And again, it's like most of this is pretty apparent in the show. Like, in terms of the, you know, the CCT, right? The CCTS, is it? I think they just refer to it as the CCT rather. In the show, right, when they bring that up, they have gone to a big communication hub. We may not know the details, but the CCT is like, oh, it's a communications thing. Because they just went to a communications hub.
Animated in the same style as the intro, effectively admitting the actual introduction didn't explain anything.
Oh, come on. That is not... It's not how that works. At all. That's not admitting the intro didn't explain anything. It's just a nice style, and it allows a visual cohesion with the show.
If you watch through RWBY on Crunchyroll, which, why? The World of Remnant episodes are scattered between the normal ones. They're genuinely telling you that the best way to experience RWBY is for the show to stop every now and then, so that you can be told a few minutes of straight exposition.
The World of Remnant is a dangerous place.
Is Rooster Teeth, and especially, are the RWBY actually in charge of where the episodes get placed on Crunchyroll? Let me know.
It especially doesn't help that the explanations in World of Remnant aren't very good either. The World of Remnant episode about Grimm explains that we don't really know much about Grimm.
Scientists perpetually find themselves with more questions than answers. Little else is known about the creatures of Grimm.
Great! Thanks! The World of Remnant episode on Semblances tells us that every single semblance is completely unique.
The wielder semblance is completely unique.
But then it turns out that Weiss's semblance isn't unique, and the Schnee family have the exact same semblances.
Right, and that's not how it normally works. That's why it's pointed out. It doesn't work that way usually.
It's like it's in their blood or something, and her sister Winter can do the same things as her.
Every Schnee has the ability to summon. We have for generations.
So they're unique, except when they're not. I'm glad there's a video explaining how this works. But it would also help if the explanation made sense, and if it didn't just raise more questions. Also,
we Schnees are unique. Unlike many, our semblance is hereditary.
Yeah, there you go.
Winter is telling this piece of information to her sister. She's one of the only other people who already knows this. This isn't how you write exposition! I don't want to be down on the concepts themselves here. The idea of semblances, and the idea of someone keeping their semblance a secret to have an advantage, or a semblance that runs in the bloodline of a family and gives one of our leads a reputation to live up to, are all decent things to put in a story, and they could all potentially be really interesting. But for those things to be interesting, they have to be actually conveyed well, and then used well in the story itself. A good idea isn't enough. The World of Remnant episode about the Schnee Dust Company largely covers the life and times of a really interesting sounding character who we never see in the show and who never actually comes up by name ever. They just invented a cool guy and made up a story about him. You don't get story points because an idea sounded good. In fact, it just means you lose more points by wasting it. If you do watch all of RWBY and do enough research and ask around on the Reddit, but only once you've consulted the wiki and watched World of Remnant, you might finally know what the story of RWBY was supposed to be and understand how cool so many aspects of the plot sound in the abstract, but you probably won't have had a good time. You can't just tell me how good the story or concepts might be in a side cartoon. You have to tell me a good story. If you try to get someone new into RWBY, pay attention to how much you have to explain things on the show's behalf, even if you like the show and think it's good, or at least get
for what it's worth, I've gotten a few people into RWBY, and I've never had to explain anything.
That's good. Thinking critically, we have to acknowledge that it certainly takes some getting there. It's especially disappointing when sometimes you can see the show setting things up quite well. When RWBY gets done beating up the Sterling squad, the bad guy manages to get away in a ship, even though a new lady turns up to help RWBY stop him. I bring this up because, credit where it's due, there is some pretty good storytelling going on here. When this new character turns up and is wrecking shop, Malcolm McDowell boy says,
We got a huntress!
and this is a really good line, because the audience is like, that sounds neat, what's that? I bet they're important. And then, right after, RWBY reacts like meeting a huntress is really cool.
You're a huntress. Can I have your autograph?
This is a decently animated scene, but also good exposition, especially compared to the rest of the show. We know that hunters are a big deal without having to be directly told who they are or what they do, based purely on seeing a guy react in a kind of panic to her appearance, and how RWBY reacts herself. It's fun and cool, and doesn't bog you down with explicit explanations, so the writing in this sequence specifically really works. That said, you fully learn what huntsmen and huntresses are by sitting in a classroom while they make a point about how this is boring and the other characters aren't paying attention.
Individuals who have sworn to protect those who cannot protect themselves.
Oh really? Wow, thanks. This scene was worth my time. Surely there's a more interesting way to explain things to your audience than with a lecture. Besides, that's what World of Remnant's Huntsman episode is for. What this scene with Glinda implies to me is that someone on the writing team did know how to write exposition, and his name was Monty Ohm. The action scenes, the ones Monty had...
But the dialogue was Miles and Carrie. You established that earlier. Monty didn't do the writing.
Gone off to make while the writers wrote the other stuff are consistently the most interesting examples of character writing and storytelling in the show. In Volume 2, our characters are so busy having drama or doing wacky skits to establish...
I can't believe he just showed the burning the candle scene and just waved it away as, like, having drama. As if that's not, like, a huge, personal, deep, intimate moment.
Establish why these characters are actually friends.
Did you steal my binder? I am not a crook.
What are you talking about?
He said a dog? In the mail?
But a few episodes in, we have this big fight where the team work together to beat a big mecha. And in this scene, Monty does all the characterization that could have happened in the show. The characters' teamwork, using each other's abilities in conjunction together, is choreographed and prepared in a way that shows the audience that these characters have learned to work together. Each move even gets called for by RWBY using a code word.
Razorman! Check me! Ladybug! Bumblebee! We have to slow it down! And how do you propose we do that? Ice-powered!
Showing that she's grown and learned to direct the team she's leading. The audience can finally tell that these characters have a really intimate knowledge of each other and their skills. These names were actually chosen by Monty as a reference to the ship names the fandom had come up with for the characters. What's a ship? Sorry, that wasn't meant to signify my feelings on the subject. Well, a ship is a thing fan discussions of media end up doing, when fans want or predict characters to end up in a relationship together. Sometimes creators make subtle nods to these communities in their work. Like in Steven Universe, that one time they had a literal ship with 2 characters on it. Referencing the ship names is a little bit creepy. RWBY is like 15, you know?
Ruby Rose is a 15-year-old girl.
So you can't ship characters that, like, I gotta tell you, if your problem is with shipping characters that, which is just romance, by the way, shipping is just romance, it's not sex. If your problem is with shipping, you know, younger characters, I got a lot of other shows that have worse issues with that than RWBY.
But at least let's take careful note of how RWBY and Yang are the only pair that don't do a team attack here, because that would mean acknowledging the part of your fandom that came up with a ship name for 2 half-siblings, which is fucking disgusting. In addition to being a really cool Monty fight, we're seeing our main characters in action as a group, and learning about how they've grown together between seasons. Would have been nice to see them grow in the actual show, but credit where it's due. It's well conveyed.
Again, you just skipped over, like, a huge intimate moment between Blake and Yang.
Exposition. You might not even notice you're learning about the characters because you're watching them beat up a giant robot. It's a good scene. Like, that's the thing about early RWBY. It'll just keep inexplicably having good scenes that are either super fun to watch or work way better story-wise than anything around them. And usually it's the action sequences which somehow manage to outwrite the writing of the scenes the writers came up with. Here's another example. As we've mentioned, the bad guys finding out Pyrrha's semblance is a big deal. But since this discovery is made during a fight, it's done really well using animation and artistry. Mercury has a sparring match with Pyrrha, and the action is shot to focus specifically on the attention Mercury is paying to how she moves and fights, like he's trying to figure her out. Then, when she tries to stealthily use her semblance to avoid one of his attacks, he notices what she's doing. It was actually animated by Shane Newville, whose grasp of using animation to tell a story is really good. In the director's commentary track for this scene, the whole team can't not gush about the work he does.
Was this Shane?
This is all Shane.
Yeah.
This is all Shane, layering in that tiny little stuff where it's like, he got the tone of the fight. He knew what this was about.
Yeah, man.
The way they were able to read each other and the movements. Barring the kicks and flips and everything, it's just, there's so much going on, like, in the performance.
It's like a silent dialogue scene. Oh my god, I love this.
We're looking at their faces and seeing them examine things. It's a really strongly characterized scene just out of nowhere. Also, I got that reference. Good one, Shane. Compare and contrast with when the bad...
So, again, let's highlight that this is another example of him complementing an allusion to another thing. When it comes to the animation, and specifically the work of Monty and Shane, it's good. As you know, as you'll see later, homages and allusions to other stuff are bad when done by Miles and Carey, apparently.
Guys actually discuss Pyrrha's power, and they're just sitting around going, oh, she can control magnets. It's called polarity, which I also know somehow. Like, it's so weird that really well-told scenes are right next to this. Scenes made by Monty and Shane feel like pieces of a much better, or at least better told show, trapped next to this stuff. And outside of the fights, the animation is, well...
Again, there wasn't an animation department at Rooster Teeth until Volume 3.
We have big plans for you, Roman.
The fuck, is that just fucking concept art? If you want to really unproductively hate RWBY all day forever, you know, if for some reason you've decided it's your job to be angry and sad all your life, there's tons of animation problems or ugly sequences or shots to poke fun at. But talking about them in this video seems like a distraction, because the show looking perfect wouldn't fix its core writing and storytelling problems, and I've enjoyed much worse looking shows because they told a better story. The biggest problem with the show isn't the animation surrounding these fights, it's the story surrounding these fights. It's the way these fights are being connected, or rather not connected, by the writing. A useful thing to know is that while working on Red vs. Blue, the script would have gaps in it, marked Monty action sequence here.
I would then find places in that script, places between the lines in that table read, and start inserting my sequences in the parts where Bernie's script would say Monty action sequence here.
Red vs. Blue had a script, but how exactly the fights looked was entirely up to Monty, since he was the best at deciding that stuff. While the rest of the show was being made in the traditional machinima style in the Halo games themselves, Monty was making the best possible fight he could, and these pieces of the show joined together at the end of this process pretty organically. Early RWBY was made using a fairly similar principle. The three main creators had agreed on the story in the broad strokes, and then Monty was doing the fights in the same way, but with the writers actually writing out the plot they'd agreed upon while Monty was making the action sequences. To give an example, the first fight takes place in a street environment, so they wrote the dust store robbery and then as quickly as possible move the events outside to connect with the street fight, and then up to the rooftops to connect to another Monty fight. You can see this in the version of the show on the DVD extras, where they show episode 1 with the storyboards. Everything the main crew were working on had been written and had storyboards, so the animators knew what visuals to go for, and then when Monty's cool fights are happening, the storyboard is just a black card that reads Monty action, and given what his fights were like, 3 exclamation marks is appropriate. The "we got a huntress" part I praised earlier was also a Monty action sequence on the storyboard, so it's likely Monty came up with the idea to have Torchwick say words to this effect.
It's not really how that... Like, why would you come to that conclusion? He did the animation. He did the fights. Why would you think that Miles and Carrie didn't do the writing when they're the writers? Why does it make more sense for Monty to have come up with the writing here than to work with the writers he deliberately sought out to work with?
And not the writers, whose best idea for conveying what a huntress is to have a professor tell our huntresses in training in a classroom, as if they've never been told before, even though they're going to a school for huntresses, and then to write a side cartoon telling you again. In another good example, when the characters are being tested in the woods, the characters all get their individual plot lines, and then when it's time for the big Monty fight, designed to happen at this point in the story, we get this insert shot of the characters running to the specific location where Monty's fight was done. Now, this is one of the standout action sequences of Monty's career. It's really good. It's one of my favorite animated sequences in basically anything. It's just great. But really disappointingly, due to some strange writing choices, it doesn't actually connect to the story that was just happening, because the gang's plan at this point was to run away from the big monsters attacking them.
There's no point in fighting these things.
Run and live. That is an idea I can get behind.
But as soon as Monty fight mode begins, it's like they were leading them here to have a proper place to fight them. I'm assuming Monty and the writers had decided on this fight in a very broad way, like during the trial the gang fights some giant monsters and it's really cool, and Monty made this fight thinking the writers would come up with an explanation, but the explanation ended up being, let's run away.
There's no point in fighting these.
Yeah, I mean, this is so, like, why would you think they're not coordinating? Why would you come to that conclusion when, like, it just feels really weird. Why would they not be coordinating? Like, even if it's a little bit clunky, why would they not be coordinating? Because it's clunky? So it must have been the people you don't like?
Things.
I don't know how to make this clear enough, That is the one thing that you do not write immediately before cutting to a fight against them! And the worst part is, this is probably the most seamless connection between the story and action the show manages to do. Because you can at least, like, assume that their means of escape got cut off or they got too close and they had to fight. But when they have several characters agree to run away and they say they're going to run away, having them just kinda stop? It's very strange. Another really strange thing you start to notice when you try and keep track of how the fights are being connected is that character arcs seem to start and then suddenly stop on a whim. When the characters get sorted into teams, RWBY is made the leader of Team RWBY, and this annoys Weiss, who thinks RWBY isn't very smart or good, and who she argued with a lot during the test. But then during the test, Weiss decided to be nicer?
I'll be nicer.
But she's mad again now because she wanted to be the leader. This seems like it's going to set up interesting character tensions, maybe a developing friendship with emotional speed bumps along the way. But it's resolved instantly when Weiss complains to a professor, and they say, "Stop it."
That's preposterous.
And
Yeah, because Weiss isn't, like, she's a brat, and she's a bit entitled, but she's not a bad person. She's specific, like, again, we find out in Volume 2, she specifically went to Beacon because she wants to address the harm that her father and her family name has been used to do. So, like, and she wants to be a great huntress. So why, like, she's not a bad person. She just has growth that she needs. So when she gets her flaws pointed out to her by people she respects, like the teachers, she listens.
Weiss decides to be nice.
I am going to be the best teammate you will ever have.
I'll be nicer.
Right, yeah, because here, right, RWBY isn't the leader yet, so the insecurities around not being the leader have not come into the picture yet. When RWBY is chosen to be leader, those insecurities flare up. And Weiss is like, wait a second. Like, sure, I was gonna be nicer to RWBY, but, like, she's still, like, I'm still much more experienced than her. Why am I not the leader? It's, you know.
Problem solved. Writing. Like, all Weiss needed was for a man in a position of authority to give her a good telling off.
Your exceptional skill on the battlefield is matched only by your poor attitude.
Just so you know, Weiss's main character arc is about her relationship with her abusive and controlling father, so the idea this is what she needed is actually kind of gross.
What? She went to the school because she wanted to be taught how to be a good huntress. So when a teacher at the school tells her, tries to teach her how to be a good huntress, she shouldn't be listening, because, like, there are other issues with Professor Port, specifically in how he does, like, a little bit of a flirting with Yang in class, which is uncomfortable, and again is one of those things of, like, oh, the writers have grown since then, but, like, yeah, it's, oof. Oh, Weiss listens to someone in authority who knows what he's talking about. So it's gross because her father was abusive. Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
Me personally, I still don't see it as a big deal. I'm just like, I don't see them as like, these are 4 females that are awesome. I'm like, no, these are just 4 cool kids that are fun.
Can't really think of any moment really where we sat down and we're like, okay, this is happening, or we want this to happen because they are female.
Yeah, no, it's always just been like,
it's just like they're 4 people.
They're awkward teenagers.
Hey, #RWBY fans. Have you heard? Yang Xiaolong is gonna fight Tifa Lockhart. My money's on the hot one.
2015. Half a decade before this video came out. Hey hbomb, did you grow in 5 years? Or did you stay exactly the same person as you were in 2015?
Alright, so we've got Yang Xiaolong. She is the bubbly one in the bunch. She's just so happy. She's the party girl. She's, you know, pretty much everything everybody wants in a girl.
So they brought back the interesting character conflict of the test, then re-resolved it right away. This is like watching a learner driver stall their car. Like, come on, you almost got a story going. Just keep going at it. Immediately after having a character just give up on what their character arc should have been, the plot suddenly switches gears and focuses on someone else. Wait, gears? And then there was the stall the car thing. Was that a deliberate metaphor? No, that was an accident. I'm sorry. Thus begins the Jean arc. A big portion of Volume 1, 4 of the show's first 16 episodes, is about how Jean actually forged his anime college transcript to get into this school, which makes him the deepest character we've met so far. Wow, who'd have thought? And then he gets bullied by a generic mean guy who threatens to tell people his secret and get him kicked out. But then he stands up to him and saves him from a big Grimm, and now he respects him so he won't...
So let's see. There's a very important moment for RWBY actually during this whole thing where she talks to Jean about being a leader. And it's actually very important to her own arc about being a leader because it shows the unfair expectations she's putting on herself as a leader. Also, Card definitely does not respect Jean, he's afraid of him.
Share his secret. That's the solution to bullying, kids. Save them from a monster and maybe they'll leave you alone out of respect. Jean finally asks Pyrrha for the help she was offering him instead of pointlessly refusing it, and it becomes kinda clear Pyrrha's working really hard on this guy because she's into him for some...
Also, there's a whole important arc about masculinity and learning to accept help, which is a whole important thing actually about RWBY overall. It's a whole big recurring theme. Yeah.
Reason. This multi-episode break from covering any of the main characters of RWBY, you know, it's in the name to focus on one of the lead writer's characters, certainly seems strange, but what makes the pace even...
One of the lead writer's character... Again, Monty developed the outline with Miles and Carrie.
Even stranger is that once those episodes are done, there are 2 episodes left, and they have to now connect the story to this final fight scene in a shipyard, starring, and I can't stress this enough, 2 characters who have not yet appeared in the show. Oops! So the next episode starts and, here's Sun, he's here now! And then while chasing him, the gang randomly runs into, literally runs into Penny, the other character who they forgot to put in earlier, because there was just nothing you could have cut to establish these characters sooner. This pure gold just has to stay in, so now these characters...
It wouldn't have made sense to put them in earlier. They had to be there for the Vital Festival. Why would they be in the show earlier than the point when they get to the Vital Festival? Maybe they could have cut down the Jean stuff to maybe by 1 episode or something. But again, right, we're talking about much shorter episodes in Volume 1.
Characters are here just in time for the climactic fight. Sun's stick that turns into nunchucks that are also guns is so fun to watch. It's just amazing. However, because of the frankly bizarre pacing caused by the show's production, I have barely any idea who most of the characters involved even are, which affects my engagement somewhat. It's a really cool scene, but it feels very disconnected from the rest of the story. Now, exactly how this problem got here isn't something it feels fair to speculate about too hard. I'm sure you could easily conclude that the 3 agreed on a
Never stopped you before.
story, and then the writers just messed up, making the plot feel like a cohesive whole with the action sequences. And writing-wise, the show feels very idiosyncratic and self-conscious, like it's looking for something to spend its time doing before the next fight, and therefore misspending the time that would have added context and character to those fights until it's too late to really do that stuff properly. But at the same time, some behind-the-scenes material and panels and stuff seem to imply that Monty went away and then came back with new characters and action sequences for them, and dropped it on Miles and Kerry with little to no notice. However, however this disconnect got here, it's not very good and relates to some serious production problems. Like if your main creative leads aren't on the same page about what's happening in the story's probably not going to wind up very good. And also,
So why have you been blaming Miles and Carrie? Sounds to me like Monty is also part of the problem, if this is what you're going with.
the way a huge swath of the show isn't about Team RWBY, and their plotline evaporates to make way for the adventures of some guy, the writers don't seem to be handling the story they did know they were supposed to do that well either. It certainly doesn't make it look any better that the guy is voiced by one of them. Oh, and then in Volume 2, they correct for this problem by adding a second author insert?
Not an author insert. You are using... Like, if you had some actual interview of them specifically saying, like, talking about Neptune and Jean, and, like, specifically speaking at them from a perspective that seemed like, oh, like, I play Jean, and, like, I was really excited to tell this story about Pyrrha and Jean getting together finally, or something like that. Like, that would still be flimsy, but it would be much stronger than what you've got here.
So a guy called Neptune turns up. He's a really cool, attractive guy who wears goggles, and they make a point of showing how Weiss is into him, like, right away. Let's not assume that this is, like, author insert, wish fulfillment, or whatever. Like, let's assume they just came up with this character, and then Kerry Shawcross decided to voice him. Like, hey, if you're writing a whole show, you should get to voice one of the characters, that's fine. But come on, it was really weird that you picked Neptune, man. This character gets into love trial...
Again, how do you know he picked it? He picked that role himself. Like, I get that he was one of the writers, but talk about the casting process. Talk about, you know, you need more evidence than, you know. Here's an example, right? Mel Brooks often plays characters in his own films. Does he want, like, he plays a fascist in Spaceballs. Does he like fascism? Is it an excuse for him to be able to play a fascist, like, because he likes fascism? Sure, that character's mostly a joke, but, like, how much are you really going to say that the creator playing a character is because they want that, like, they have a self-insert, right? Sometimes they just like a character, or, like, they were working with someone and the casting director was, or, people who were in charge of the casting. I don't think there was a casting director for RWBY, but, like, it was probably Monty. Again, he chose the four girls, all their voice actors, so he probably chose the other ones, at least some of them.
Angle stuff with a bunch of young female characters who you write, so it just feels weird. And then this character hangs out a bunch with Yang. You know.
Pretty much everything everybody wants in a girl.
Whoa, what a woman.
She's 17.
And yet, in Volume 2, the plot pauses itself for a shockingly long amount of time to have an arc where our characters prepare for the school prom and figure out who's inviting who. Because Weiss wants to go with Neptune, but Jean wants to go with Weiss. But Pyrrha wants to go with Jean, and she can't bring herself to ask it. So whenever something in the show happens that's really strangely explained and you wish got, like, told to you better, remember that they had time to do it and spent it writing scenes where two characters voiced by them hang out at a prom.
4 hours. No, sorry. 3.5 hours of Volume 1 and 2 together. Not saying they had no time, but they don't have as much time as you're really implying they had. Because you're not talking about how much runtime they actually had, considering their tiny budget.
Guys, you know when you were talking about needing to get exposition across as best you could? Put it here. Put naturalistic exposition in the scenes where this fucking prom would have gone. The prom stuff isn't even necessarily bad either. It's nice seeing the sweet dance animations Monty did for it. He was a big fan of animating dancing along with fights. And it's cool seeing this stuff in RWBY too.
God, it... Again, Monty helped develop the main beats. It's not Miles and Carrie's fault. Okay, I'm gonna have to wrap up here for today because I've got movie night with folks coming up in about an hour, and I need to have dinner first. Yeah. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave this up until, well, no. I'll think on it. I'll think on whether I'm going to leave this up or not. But I'll be doing, I'm sure, a part 2 where I go over the rest of this. Because there's more to go. But thank you so much to everyone who wasn't here. I appreciate all the support. And I will see you for part 2, most likely. I hope this was interesting. And I hope that it, I don't know, provided some value to stuff. And yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye. For now.